Final Resonance TV and episode number 31 of Van Halen Stories. Today, my guest is Martin Smith, all the way from Sheffield, England. My first across the pond guest on Van Halen Stories. Martin's got this great new video out, or a couple of videos actually, on the Brown sound that I saw that I was really impressed with, and we connected. And, it seems like all the Van Halen people, especially, I don't know exactly how old you are, but I imagine we're in the same range, go back to all the same stories and lore and legends and all that. And your video, kind of goes through each piece of that, from the amplifier, the whole thing. Cause I just had Dave Friedman on, we were kind of talking about a lot of that as well, all those details in the sound, the Brown sound. And I even did a Brown sound video years ago. And it was one of my first videos. I got really trashed for that video.
I'm not surprised. It's contentious.
Right. Yeah, it was an early video.
Yeah, Jeff, I just wanted to say, Jeff, thanks so much for having me on your show.
Sure.
Yeah, I really appreciate it because I've been watching your content for so long. We've jumped into this Van Halen community and it's kind of, it's full of folklore, it's full of myths, and it's full of some truth as well. And I'm just trying to find my way amongst all that and then just enjoy the process because I've loved this music since I was 12. I'm 54 now, to answer your question about age. So this has been a part of me since I was probably 11, 1980-ish.
Yeah, right.
So, that's when he...
Since we're going to talk about that, let me just say that Martin's a producer engineer in Sheffield, currently at Muse Studios, and doing projects, right? Just original projects primarily, or?
Yeah, artists. I was also doing music for like car films. So like when BMW released a car film, like a 3-minute film, they like a full composed track for the thing. So that was half of what I did. And then the other half was artists. But as it worked out, we had this thing called Brexit in the UK where we separated ourselves from Europe. And at that point, I lost the ability to do those car commercials for Europe because we had no financial transaction thing. Okay. So that became more all about the artists, which was great because I'm an artist myself and I've always enjoyed that process. But it just means you have to work harder and find more artists. But I've been quite lucky. I've worked with some people, Gomez and Jarvis Cocker, who was in a band called Pulp. And a guy called Richard Hawley, who's a sort of a fairly well-known UK singer-songwriter, guitarist. He's a guitar nut. And I do a lot with those guys. So, yeah, and new artists as well. So it's all fun. You get the full spectrum of, beginners to very experienced pros. I love it. I stopped being a guitarist at 30 to go into production. Okay. And I'm getting back into the guitar now.
I was going to say, you're a great guitarist, so I don't know what you're talking about.
I've been woodshedding madly for the last 2 years trying to get my chops back.
Yeah, it sounded great, man. That was all you were playing on that, and I'm the one cover and all that. So it was great stuff.
Oh, much appreciated. Thank you, Jeff.
Sure.
That's great.
Sure, I noticed you had a Trident board as well, which is a brand that, we actually have some up in Muscle Shoals, which is not really far from me. It's actually, only about an hour from me.
You had a what? Sorry, I missed that.
Up in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, there, where kind of all the studios are up there. There's a couple of Tridents up there.
Oh, a Trident. Sorry, man. Yeah. I got mine. It was the theatre console in Cardiff in Wales.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And so, yeah, it was full of cigarettes and live debris. And I bought it for $3,500, and I was like, yeah, I've got a Trident console, and this is fantastic. And I took it to this guy who was going to recondition it and change some pots and recap it and all that. And it ended up costing twice the price of the board.
Right.
And yeah, it was extreme, but it's working good. I like the pre's in it, but I think I ought to get some APIs for that sunset fantasticness,
Right. Yeah, it's another thing that and the lore is the production part of that, with Don Landy, who's the silent guy in all of these interviews that we need to get a hold of and really.
Where is Don? Where is Don?
You made that point about his miking technique, and that was a great point. And another contention where whether it's JBLs or not JBLs, and it seems like I think you're right. I think there's no pictures. There. In fact, that cabinet is a slant in the studio, and the
correct.
And like you said, from those Lowe's Hour photos and everything seemed like he had those, the ones I've seen, the pictures of were in straights.
Yeah, exactly. And
So,
apparently he didn't like the angled, so why he was using the angled? I think that photo's from Don Landy's on Jamie's Crying
yeah,
overdub session or something like that.
yeah.
Um,
From Greg's book.
but yeah, say again.
From Greg Randolph's book, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so, yeah, you can tell it's an angled cabinet. And I think if it had JBLs in the top, they would shine a little bit from the angle the cab's at. I think you'd even see a little glint of silver. So yeah, more and more reasons to think that there are no JBLs in there at all, I don't think.
Yeah, you know, even if my buddy Alan Garber mentioned, you know, the dust caps or whatever weren't the same. I don't know about all that part of it, but okay, if they didn't fit the cabinet, Eddie would make them fit the cabinet, right?
yeah. He'd just chop it and stripe it and burn it.
You know, I think, you know, if I think about that from at that time frame, those guys didn't have any money, right? They didn't have any money. Okay.
It was early. Yeah. It was early. Apparently, he got, yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I was speaking to Niels Lozauer and he spoke to Rudy Laren. Yeah. And apparently Eddie had him up one night tearing all the Tolex off those 412s. Okay. And he did it overnight and he had no fingernails left the next day. He was absolutely beat. So yeah, that was all done one inspired night, apparently.
Really? So that's when it came off. Because there's other stories about those cabins being lifted.
yeah, I heard that from Chris Holmes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I don't know. You know, all I know is what a few, like Greg Leon had said on here about that, and Greg was from that area, and obviously contemporary of those guys.
Look cool though.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it's become an iconic look for that tour and everything. So yeah, that's pretty neat. Let's talk about, you know, you went you did a class online thing at Berkeley. You said to me off camera, and you were in UFO for a bit. What was you said you were 17 when you joined UFO?
Yeah, so I did some demos when I was 16. I started playing about 12. Sorry, I think I'm pressing my keyboard with my groin. I started about 12, and then I did some demos at 16 in a local studio. And I just thought, well, I'll send them out to record companies and all that sort of stuff. And then I started getting some calls back there was a radio DJ who knew Iron Maiden. Okay. And it turns out that Steve Harris from Iron Maiden was best mates with Pete Way from UFO. Iron Maiden didn't need a guitar player, obviously, at that time, but Pete Way did. So he gave me a bell. I was in a studio in like a residential studio about an hour away from home. And the bass player came to get me. He said, Martin, there's a guy on the phone, says he's Pete Way. And this guy who came to get me, he was the biggest UFO fan in the world. Wow. He was like ashen-faced. And he's like, I don't believe it. Pete Way's on the phone. But yeah. And he said, I've got your demo tape. And do you want to come and play with me? I'm like, yeah, I reckon. So I moved down there to live with him. And he had a supermodel wife. And his manager was like this like psychology kind of guy who was, a bit scary. And we're all living in this, all lived in this house in Chiswick in London, along with an American guitarist called Eric Gammons. I don't know if you're aware of Eric Gammons. He played with, I think, Cold Sweat with Mark Ferrari. Is that right? Could be that. Great guy. So, I think Pete wanted like an American guitarist and an English guitarist and have this kind of playoff thing. So that lasted about a year. It was wasted.
What year was that?
That would have been 87, 88-ish. Yeah, about 88.
Right.
It didn't quite work out. We had various different singers. We tried the guy from the Choir Boys, and we tried the guy from Tigers of Pang Tang, loads of sort of British heavy metal bands at the time. But we just couldn't get a deal. I think everyone knew that Pete was just a little bit less reliable at that point. You know, we'd go to rehearsals 10 in the morning and he'd say, hey, Martin, you got a quid? I'm like, yeah. And he'd go, yeah, just going to get a special brew, which is like the strongest lager you can possibly get in the UK. And that would be Breakfast of Champions. So, yeah, it was crazy, but it was good fun. Anyway, it didn't work out, but I came home for about 2 months and then he got back together with Phil Mogg from UFO. and then gave me a bell and said, yeah, we're in Birmingham doing UFO. Do you want to come and have a go and try and write some music? So yeah, that was it. So I've got memories of Phil Mogg trying to write to my guitar riffs, which is just like a great memory, you know.
Right.
Especially
with especially with that kind of legacy of Michael Schenker's, time in that band. And I just saw Michael Schenker for the first time live last winter. He came to Nashville.
Oh, right.
And I had a chance to finally see him live, and he's still just insanely amazing. And they did so much of that UFO material on that show that the classic stuff. So yeah, it was really cool.
Great songs, really good songs, Lights Out and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah. So when you go back to your childhood, you said you started kind of with this all at like 12 years old, right? You said. So
yeah, correct.
Give me your kind of your Van Halen, story from when you were a kid, and when you heard it, what the whole inspiration was about. What your first concert was with that, if you had one.
Yeah, it started with a cassette. Somebody shared a cassette with me of Van Halen 1, and you just heard it for the first time, and you just could not believe that was a guitar. It was ridiculous, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. What the hell? So that got put in my portable cassette recorder, and I just go to school with it every day. I just wanted to listen to it all the damn time, just work out what was going on and share it with my school friends who'd be like, yeah, so what? And I'm like, why don't you get this? This is like the best thing that's ever happened in the world, because it was seismic change between all the classic rock that had gone before it. Suddenly, like, it was ground zero again. It was just like something new started. I couldn't get enough of it. So Van Halen 1 was big. And then I had some friends, probably about that time, actually, Women and Children First was being released. So that was probably the first one I actually bought.
Oh, 80.
That's it, 80, 81. Then just continued. It's never left me, really. It's the one thing I can listen to every day and not get bored.
Yeah, that album still sounds so great, too. Even though Eddie apparently didn't like the sound on it, as he says, a lot.
Van Halen 1?
Yeah.
No, it's funny. I was listening to the Jazz Obrecht 1980 interview yesterday, and Eddie clearly says it's the best sounding album. He loved it.
I know, but he said later.
Yeah, but later then he changed his mind about 84 time when he got 5150 Studio, and I think he started to review his thinking then. But definitely at the time he was like, no, it sounds great. I love it.
Right.
So.
It was back
Ed and his stories.
Yeah, he kind of went back and forth on that one. And you mentioned this whole thing about the Brown sound and his brother's snare and the differentiation and Jazz's interview,
Exactly.
And Jazz was on here and totally. He was saying it was his guitar sound, and a lot of people would argue that it was always, well, he did say that. He said both.
And I get comments. I still get comments every day, even though I put in the video the sound of Ed talking, saying it's his guitar sound, and people are still commenting saying, no, it's Alex's snare. It's like, yeah, damn, Alex had a great snare sound, don't get me wrong, but you wouldn't make a name for it. It's not like to Ed, I mean, obviously his guitar sound was the most important thing. And so he had a term for it, because I don't know whether he's got that sort of thing where you make colors from sounds in your head. Synesthesia, right? Yeah. I don't know if he had that, but I think he had a sort of a musical awareness that made him think in terms of colors and brightness and darkness. He was obviously so tuned into that, because you've got marshals, right? And certain marshals are too bright, they're too fizzy, some are too dark, and he was riding the balance of that. So his ear was obviously super in tune with brightness to darkness ratio and all that.
I think that's a big part of what we call the Brown sound is the fact that, and he said this in the interviews, I believe, he said it's not harsh, it doesn't have the ice picky thing. I'm not sure that's how he said that, but it's something, it was along those lines. But and it's something that I've been, obviously searching for since I was a kid as well. Just not, even if it's not exactly Van Halen 1 or whatever, that basic sound, I think that even right after that, I listened to George Lynch, and I heard,
me too.
A pretty classic Marshall sound on Breaking the Change, that sound. And I thought,
me too.
That's kind of the department I want to be in. That's what I wanted to hear, right? And even back then, though, that was really the dawn of the JCM 800 at that period. So we still weren't really super head gainy yet. And then, things since you and I are kids have gone from, I think the first amp that I knew about that was a small amp that had that kind of gain was the Fender Super Champ. in '83.
Oh, yeah. You're talking about all the amps I've owned. I've owned a couple of Super Champs. The Paul Revere designed one.
Right, exactly. And
apparently Warren took that out. Warren DeMartini used to take that out on tour with the rap.
And he recorded with it. They said that round and round.
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, it's a good sound, but there isn't much tonal change you can achieve with it. It's kind of like one sound. My friend Clive used to have a Super Champ that Hartley Thompson. Do you know Hartley Thompson? They used to make amps for Alan Holdsworth, solid state amps. Yeah. Well, they modded my JCM at the time. And then my friend had a Super Champ and they put a 12-inch speaker in there, like a Celestian, and upgraded it. And that thing sounded amazing. It could stand alongside anything, you know. Wow. So really cool amps.
So you had it switched to a 12-inch from a 10.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Quite a high capacity 12, and it just opened the whole thing up. Did you own a Super Champ?
I never did. You know what? This is the funny story, though, about my first experience with the Super Champ is that my parents were taking me to buy my first guitar and amp. And I somehow got my hands on a used Les Paul in that building that day, a black custom.
Wow.
And, and then I plugged it into the Super Champ. And I didn't know anything about the Super Champ. I just plugged it into an amp. And when I pull, I think it's pull switch distortion, if I remember right.
Correct. Yeah. Pull for lead. Yeah.
Right. And when I pulled that switch, I was like, this is the sound right here, right? This is it, man.
Yeah.
This guitar, I can barely play, at all, but I knew that was it, Now my parents,
you were lucky.
They didn't buy me that amp, and they didn't buy me that black Les Paul. But I ended up with an Ibanez Broadstar 2 and some sort of Ibanez amp that had some sort of distortion on it. So I did get a Marshall not long after and a Gibson. But But anyway, the that experience was like, it was like that thing where I went, that's the sound. Like the Brown sound. I kind of like, this is what I'm hearing. This distortion.
Yeah, special moments.
Yeah,
special moments. Yeah, I was in LA about 96, maybe earlier, maybe 93, because the Chili Peppers were looking for a guitarist, and I think it was around that period when Frusciante left for the first time. And I knew a few people in LA, so I thought, right, I'm going there. I'm going to take my guitar. I'm just going to try and open doors and see what happens. It's a stupid idea, but I thought I'd do it. Right. And after a couple of nights, there was gunshots in the place I was staying above, and it just freaked me out. And I was on between Sunset and Hollywood Boulevard in a Seven Dials motel, and it was really. I had a great time, but it was also really, really scary. So I thought, to hell with this. And I went down to a music shop and I found a Super Champ, and I spent the rest of my money on a Super Champ and brought it home. So I got something good out of the whole thing, but not what I hoped for.
Well, the Super Champs are very expensive now.
I bet. My best friend still got one, so if I need one, I can borrow his.
Right. To buy one's ridiculous. I think they're in the $1,500 range or something crazy. I can't remember. I checked a while back.
All right.
Yeah, I'm sure.
No, everything's crazy now.
I'm sure if I went back and bought one, I'd be like, this isn't really what I thought it was. But for the time at that point, it was really impactful on me, at the time.
I'll do a video with some clips. I'll borrow my friends and do a video for you.
Okay, that'd be awesome. Yeah, it's remember there was a Dokken video out with George Lynch playing one backstage.
No, I haven't seen that.
It's at the end of their video that they put out with it was a collection of all their videos, and at the end he's kind of just shredding on one backstage in the mid '80s. And so
very cool.
I guess all those LA guys they're always borrowing each other's stuff. It's crazy. So.
Yeah, it was probably Warren's.
Right, probably stolen from Warren.
Yeah, exactly. Right. You know what he's like.
Right, exactly. So you were talking about, we were going to discuss today the Donington Show. You're in that area. You said you're how far from the location?
Yeah, about half an hour from Donington. Yeah, okay. Not far.
So let's talk about these festivals, okay? Because I've only been to one European show one time, and it was I was in Dublin. My friend played for Alice Cooper.
Wow.
He's the second guest on here, Damon Johnson. And it was 12 years ago or whatever. We were in town at the same time by chance, my dad and I. And we went to the O2 Arena in Dublin. And I mean, I don't know what I expected from a European crowd. I just wanted to go to a European show just to go. So what,
okay.
Have you been to an American show?
Oh, yeah, I've played shows in America. I've toured America. But I've I don't think I've seen an American. No, only in a small club.
So,
But I've seen all the early Van Halen videos where you see just the crowd going massive, large venues. I say early, I mean probably like the 79 to 82 tours.
sure,
You can see the way the crowd reacts and everything.
right.
The funny thing is that if you want to talk about Donington and the crowd specifically, there was a funny vibe on that day, I'll be honest, because we had this thing, I think I mentioned it a few moments ago, whether it was offline, but we had the classic rock that was all the way through to 82-ish. And then this new vibe, this Van Halenized rock vibe, we didn't even have a name for it. It wasn't really heavy metal, was it? And it wasn't hair metal till way later. It was better than that anyway. It was just power rock, whatever Dave and Al called it. But yeah, so yeah, big rock, right? And so the crowd was slightly divided, and a lot of them were diehard old rockers who were into AC/DC and Judas Priest and Black Sabbath, and they saw these shiny LA guys, and I think they were a little bit sort of like, oh yeah, what these guys got to show us then. So there was a vibe like that in the crowd, I noticed for sure. So yeah, it's a slightly weird thing, but I think after about 86, everyone was just like, yeah, all right, carry on, lads. You know, you're great.
Yeah, I know. I mean, a lot of the audio, I mean, it sounded like the mics were real directional, like they were shotgun mics or something. So you weren't getting a lot of crowd noise off the crowd, which I immediately noticed that wasn't probably right. You know, from the realistic part of that. I think there is the whistle stop or whistle test or whatever they call it. Video that has the crowd noise as it was, as you would have heard it, right?
Yeah, it was louder, wasn't it?
Yeah, of course. And there was a big difference in that tone from it was really watching that video. I mean, let's start from the top of the video and kind of walk through that. I mean, for me, watching the backstage stuff in the beginning, you know, and the clothing and the whole look, it was like just time travel, you know, right, for just moving away like that. But then Eddie walks out on stage, and as somebody mentioned online, he grabs the mic and maybe mentioned in your comments, grabs the mics and positions the mics himself. Now, I think it was one or two mics that he was positioning. Was it just one?
I only saw one mic, but I saw my hero bending down before the biggest gig in the UK they've played, and they hadn't played the UK for 5 years?
Right.
And he's getting down on his hands and knees with his stage clothes on, and he's going, no, I want this perfect. It's going to look at the mic, at the speaker that way, you know. That's the guy. That's who we're talking about. He was completely on that tone quest at every moment, and super inspiring. Yeah, I thought that was, because obviously I'd seen the gig from the audience perspective. I was over by the hot dog trucks right on the edge. But to suddenly get on stage at that gig I saw as a kid and to see what they were actually doing was phenomenal. It's the sort of chance you never think you'll get, really.
So you were at that gig?
So yeah, I was at that gig. Okay. I can't remember how I got there. Okay. I remember Motley Crue were really great, really sort of chaotic but cool. I don't remember a lot of the other acts, although I quite liked Y&T. I think I remember a bit of Gary Moore, but the whole day was about Van Halen for me. I'd seen AC/DC twice before, so it was like, yeah, Van Halen are in the UK, come on. Yeah, so to see him on stage and then to get that footage to confirm what was going on. Yeah, incredible. But you're right about the mic. It sort of made the whole thing seem strangely stilted because you can't hear enough crowd, and you can hear the cameramen sort of saying things that don't sound exactly vibey. And Eddie's guitar sound was coming from the other side of the stage because you're behind the PA speakers. So for a lot of reasons, it doesn't feel quite the full experience, especially for me, because I've been used to seeing all those amazing American videos from the audience perspective.
Right.
And then suddenly you're on stage with the guys and you can see them so close up, so you could see if they'd got dirty noses, you know.
Do you notice like from a, you know, as somebody who's played on large stages, and, you know, I've had that experience too, the bigger the stage is, the lower like the stage volume is. You know, you could have massive rigs, right? Like they had behind them, and it's still be fairly, you know, you could talk over it like you're hearing the sound guys, right? Or not the sound guys.
Totally true.
Video guys, you could hear them talking over everything on stage. And it's
really unusual.
Very directional.
It's so directional. Very directional, Jeff. And even when you get out to the audience at a festival, those beams are really directional. A little bit of wind and the sound just totally gets diffused. And then suddenly when the wind stops, you get the full sound. It's like, oh, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. But yeah, the on-stage sound, yeah, you can sound like there's no guitar if you're on the keyboard side sometimes. So,
right.
but yeah, the guys playing keyboards, right? I mean, wasn't it great to see them both playing keyboards at the same time?
Yeah, I saw that in '84. I was actually at the show in '84 and saw that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the first part of the tour, I was at one of the first shows. And that was really cool that he played the solo on Jump on the keyboard and all that. And it was a good surprise, because he played keyboards on they had Mike on keyboards on the Cradle of Rock in '80.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, he was playing
live.
And then Eddie played his Les Paul at the time.
Right, okay.
Les Pauls. Yeah, it was really cool. But the other thing, let's say, when they go on stage, you notice this difference in the audio. One of the things as a pro player myself that I noticed is that I could pick up the vibe like, ooh, this is a throw and go.
Yeah,
like
totally.
They either didn't get a sound check or a very little sound check or no sound check.
Yeah, there was something edgy. It was edgy, wasn't it? I felt it was edgy. But the thing that I kind of got a bit disappointed about was it was really clear from as soon as they started playing that Eddie hadn't brought the Brown sound.
Yeah, it was a different. It was decent sounding, but that whole
dry.
The whole solo section when he drops the gain way down, which was really cool, but different.
It was super cool. Yeah, it was like listening to him play acoustically on the video. Right. Yeah, just hear those fingers drubbing the wood like, and that was exciting. Right. But it felt dry. It didn't feel as satisfying as I'd wanted him to sound. So I'm taking a point off for that. Yeah. I think that there was what I did like about the throw and go aspect of it was that you kind of felt like you were seeing them in a club. Like, this is how these guys would operate in a throw and go at home in a bar. Yeah, I get that.
They just had to deal. You know what I mean?
Deal with it. Yeah.
You kind of see that they had that experience under their belt that they could just deal if they had to. But that show, because of the format, was so different. If you watch any of the shows from '84 online, it was like they were thrown into not only a different staging, but also a whole different order of everything that they were going to have to deal with as far as shorter show. None of the whole little things Roth did or whatever, the little solos or whatever, they were all a little different than what they had to do they were doing all the time at this point. That 100 and whatever shows by that point, they had been doing this every night, or whatever. So now they're throwing a throw and a go at the end. With everything out the window they've been doing, and they're having just to nail these songs, it was that kind of I was just like, I know how that is, like the throw and go. They're horrifying.
Yeah. Scary as hell.
Right.
But to start with Unchained as well, I thought, they don't normally start with Unchained, do they?
They did in '84. Yeah.
Oh, did they? Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, they did that year. Yeah. Because that was the song that got me into Van Halen. It was Unchained.
Oh, yeah.
I saw the video, and so that's what like you said, that those videos, especially those three, '81, just bring it to you with Don Landy's audio, because he recorded it all, so obviously you're gonna get that aspect too, that you were talking about the Brown sound and getting the trance coming across the way it should, and it came across way closer at those shows, obviously because Don was doing it.
Those videos are incredible. I had a friend just around the corner who was a rock DJ, a couple of years older, and he lent me those in about '82. He'd managed to get them off some American friends. Mm-hmm. So I was watching them probably a year behind you.
Right.
But I just couldn't believe how good it looked. I'd only heard it up until then and seen some stills. And then you see them on stage and you just, oh man, how do humans do that,
I saw Kiss in '79, so that was my first rock show, Dynasty tour. Was pretty impressive as a I was like, let's see, so 11 at the time, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the problem with Kiss for me, not that I've always loved Kiss, and Ace Frehley, of course, but they didn't seem like, it wasn't something like I could achieve it somehow, or I could do something like that. And then when Eddie came along, I was like, oh, these are like regular guys rocking out. I can do this.
The real humans. Well, yeah, it's regular guys.
Right. In
Yeah.
a way, yeah. In a way, but you know what I'm saying? It was like, oh, well, you don't
Yeah.
have to wear fake makeup and be, I was so young, I didn't really realize all that. But one thing I did pick up from Ace really from seeing him play live was the tapping. Because I saw him tap live with his pick, of course, is the way Ace did it.
Mm-hmm.
He was pulling off and doing tapping. When that happened, when I first ran upon Van Halen, I kind of already figured out how he was doing.
Yeah.
It was similar, so I knew that had something to do with it. So it wasn't like everybody that was so shocked on Van Halen 1. Plus, I had the 81 videos to kind of reference, but there wasn't a lot to see there. I mean, there was in Hear About It Later, when he goes up and he taps. So maybe it was that really kind of solidified it for me. But I didn't really.
Yeah, I think for me it was the guitar player, the one with the striped jacket on the front.
Mm-hmm.
It might have been that one.
Yeah. Okay.
What year is that?
84.
84. Oh God, no! It was way before that. I learned how to do it, but I saw Billy Gibbons do it. There was one track where he just did a little seven frets up, little pop with his finger, and I went, "Oh, that's sexy." So yeah, I think that was probably the start of it. But then to learn how to do it that fast was a hell of a thing. With a lot of Ed's techniques, do you find that to do them slow doesn't explain what they sound like fast? No. There's like a bump in the middle where you get over the bump and then you're almost self-propelling, that right. the movements almost take on like a different form. But if you do them slowly, you just think to yourself, how the hell is that going to sound like I'm the one or whatever it is you're working on? You've almost got to sort of be oblivious and just go, nah, damn it, I'm just going to keep doing this. It's one of the things I wonder about Ed, because how did he know it was going to get there in the end of all that practice? How did he know it was going to be that thing?
Yeah. Well, there's
I don't know if that makes sense.
Swing. Well, yeah, I think you're talking about like the swing and the bounce of his pick, the bounce. You were talking about that in your video, how that works with the string and the light picks and how that contributes to that. And that was another great part about your videos, how you go through that. And you kind of talk about how that contributes to the feel and the attack of the string. Yeah, because back then I thought it was all heavy picks. I thought Yngwie was a heavy pick guy, right? So I was all about 2.0 millimeter Dunlops. The thickest thing you can get. Not like Brian May though. He uses a sixpence or whatever. So I guess it's whatever you kind of like I always think like with gain in particular, like if you learn on a plexi how to fight one and play like Eddie did on those in the early days, then you're used to playing that attack and that feel, right? But if you're used to playing a Kemper or something or a fractal or whatever, there's a whole new feel.
You play to the system, don't you? You have to push a certain amount of attack in there to break through whatever the gain stage is. Right. And with the plexi, it's a brutal amp, isn't it? It's like it's not going to do a lot for you, really. You have to put a lot into it, which is kind of the reason that I got into the whole slaving thing. Because I just felt you could only put so much into the amp. It was never going to explode into like this extra sizzly kind of compressed sound that Eddie was achieving. Sure. So I always felt there was a mismatch between even the feel that Eddie had and the perfect pickup and the perfect guitar and the plexi with the variac and everything. Even with all of that, I still felt there was a mismatch between the fluid sustain and on all those harmonics, like they never failed on him. I was thinking he's just a superhuman god who never missed a harmonic. And when he did the tap harmonics, he was a superhuman god. But I think the amp was giving him, or his system, not the amp, but the amps maybe, was giving him that extra advantage. And that's when I started slaving. And I realized that, it just pops out then at that point. It's easier to achieve that sound.
So it's like it really, in that particular case, that has been talked. I have been told this by, I don't know if I even said this on here, but I have an amp builder who I'm friends with who is talked about coming on, but he's afraid to come on because of this subject matter. He just doesn't want
Oh,
to
right.
get into the battles with the Van Halen, people.
Tell me offline who it is. I want to know.
Oh, I see. So, but basically, he's already told me this, and he told me that how he knew was that an amp technician in Los Angeles worked on Eddie's stuff, and when Eddie brought it in, he explained how he was doing that.
Really?
Yes. And
from the man himself.
Well, he brought it in to get repaired, and then apparently, from what I understand, it was explained to this gentleman who repaired amps, who apparently was a fairly large, not Jose or whatever, but another sizable person in LA. And he went through this whole thing with Eddie, and I may have been early on, and like we were talking about Van Halen 1, right? Beyond maybe the sound, the origin of that thing.
Yeah.
And that's what most people are saying with the preamping or whatever through other ways. But yeah, so that's been a story I've heard. I haven't confirmed that story, but you mentioned this in your video and everything. I thought, well, there's that story again.
yeah, it keeps coming back, keeps recycling itself. There's another guy that I've started watching called Ozzy Arson, I think his name is.
Yeah,
he runs 3 months. Yeah. I just found him like a couple of weeks ago, and I'm like, hey, that dude's doing what I'm doing. He's thinking the same thoughts, but he's actually more of an amp builder, so that he's all over the technical side of things. Whereas I'm more into the production and the sound at the end of it. And the playing, but I'd love to meet that guy because he seems to be completely on the right track for everything I understand about it. I mean, Eddie did have the DI load box pretty early on,
which is what you in your video, right? You show that, and that's
quite.
Yeah, that's kind of more credence to that whole thing.
Yeah, and somebody else said in a loose comment once a little while back that the foot of the bomb where it has the 4 fins that would be at the back of the tail of the bomb, and it stands on those 4 fins. So they create like a square space, and rumor has it that is the place where he put the load box.
Okay, wow.
Because it could safely go in. It was a hot thing, it'd make a lot of temperature, and it could go in there safely, not burn anything. And it was between the outputs of the speakers from the amps at the side. You could plug it into the load box, and then you could feed it through to the speaker cabs, which were the other side of the bomb. And so it was just in the perfect zone, and also it hid the magic from everyone, so nobody knew what was going on. So a possible extra use for the bomb.
So has that been like verified by Rudy or anybody?
So say that again.
Has that been verified by anybody in their camp, Rudy or anybody?
Nah, nobody talks about this, do they? I mean, I love it because everyone says, no, he just used a stock amp. Okay, there was a couple of components, and I'm like, it's very clever. Yes, it was a stock amp, but it was possibly plugged into another damn stock amp.
Well, I know the guy to get in touch with. I'll find out this afternoon.
Oh man, okay, you got me very excited there. Okay, cheers.
I'll ask him. I was been meaning to text him and ask him. One of the early sound guys, and
all right,
he basically will take any question that I asked, and if he remembers all the details, because it's a lot to remember after 40 or 50 years. I mean, he will remember that. I don't know. Rudy would probably.
We're going to take him for memory regression therapy then, because he needs to remember.
Right, somebody's got to do something. If it's not going to be Don Landy, we got to get somebody else.
Exactly. I think Don's not talking because he's so implicated in those days, isn't he? And if there are secrets, he doesn't want to get asked. Will he reveal the secret? He's got to make a decision as to whether he owes that to Ed or to the world. And I can imagine it's a complex. Maybe that's the reason he's not talking. Maybe there are personal issues why he's not talking. But we want to hear, and Ted, we want them.
Well, one of the things that you made me think of a minute ago when you were talking about his amp having a little bit of extra was the discussion at Sunset Sound had with I forget his name right off the top of my head, but he was talking about being in there during the fair warning sessions. Doug Messenger.
Yeah, Doug Messenger.
Okay, so he's in there during the fair warning sessions, and he's talking about how Eddie said, "Try my amp." How easy it is, and how it's not really loud. Okay, so we know that was very act probably, right? And we also know that there might have been other things going on, but you were alluding to the harmonics popping out and that kind of thing.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, the thing for me was that Eddie didn't put his amp head on top of the cab anyway. So the chances are Doug stood in front of a 412 and Eddie's going, what do you think? And Doug's going, wow, like beaming out harmonics, but quiet. Like just the Variac on its own doesn't really reduce the volume madly, does it? You wouldn't go, that's a weird Marshall. You just go, okay, it's nice and spongy. But Doug was like, no, that's really weird. It's a lot quieter than mine, which is why I'm thinking the reamping might have brought down the level. The second amp that he was plugged into after the first one, the one that did the master volume. Mm-hmm. I'm just guessing that was really low. Because, I mean, all the harmonics apparently were just popping out the guitar, and it seems unusual that would happen with just a Variac. But, I wasn't there. Don't know.
Especially at that point in time, right? Because you're talking about gain that we know today is what the modern EVH amps are, right? But this is in 80, late 80 or something?
But that's it. So it's like, why is he making an amp now which is super distorted if he didn't use a lot of gain back in the day? Because everyone says he didn't use a lot of gain. But you listen to Running with the Devil and how long those chords last. Mm-hmm. They just keep ringing and they keep getting bigger as well. The bloom on them just regenerates. And I think to myself, there's trickery. That's, just your ears always told you that it was like an advance in guitar sound from anything that had happened before. It was obvious, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. It just went from there to there. And there has to be a reason for that. It can't just be the same equipment that everyone else was using. And his hands were magic. I mean, his hands were fast and he had a great technique. But it doesn't make the actual guitar sound change for me. So there's something to crack, and that's what I'm attempting to do, is just to crack some code. Yeah,
I mean, there's been a lot of, like, with Dave Friedman and Pete Thorne's videos, how they went through everything, and even when they were talking about the Shark over here and the super distortion and that whole discussion, I was, I've been through with Jim Gostad, who you talked about as well, who's been on here. We're all going down that rabbit hole, of this Brown Sam thing, and just trying to discover what the hidden elements are.
Of course. I think it's so cool that those guys have actually got access to the real pieces of equipment, or at least other versions of it from the right period.
Right.
Because I'm trying to do. I've owned a Plexi, but I'm trying to do all this with more contemporary equipment.
Right.
Because what I'm. Yeah, the Bray. But what I'm finding is that the slaving is doing so much that all the intricacies are so unimportant then. You've got to get a good pickup, and it's got to have a good guitar sound, and maybe a maple neck and a northern ash body, and all the parts of the recipe we know. Mm-hmm. But once you do the slaving, those things, they're less important because you're not trying to create something out of nothing. The slaving already does all that gain. Mm-hmm. And I found that like a revelation. All those little details that we worry about, and then suddenly they weren't so important. They're part of the recipe, but they're not the most important thing. The gain and the harmonics was the important thing. The way it sizzled and spoke to you,
Yeah.
So yeah.
There's another podcast that I just listened to with Dweezil Zappa, who does his Running with the Dweezil podcast.
I love that.
Yeah, and he had John Shanks on, the producer. That was involved in the last album.
All right.
And there's a story in that, and I told Dave this too, but they were blending his old Marshall in with the new stuff, and Shanks was trying to push him more in the vintage tone.
Good man.
Like us, he's just obsessed with that. And Eddie says to him, "I know what you're doing, And the reason I use my new amp is because it doesn't make me work as hard as the older amp did." And he was like we were talking about with Messenger in the studio. It was like he kind of had that in a way already, like you said with the slaving or whatever. He kind of had a way to come up with that in the early days, but how was he going to come up with that? As we got down the line, and now you have the super high gain stealth or whatever, and he gets
cascading gain.
He's getting everything he got back then without it's in a modern design.
But I think he wasn't getting the same because effectively he was using more preamp valves, wasn't he? Sure. In the more modern amps, and that just creates more distortion.
Right.
Whereas what Ed had wasn't distortion really. It was more like
front end
over.
front end.
It was more harmonics. It was more saturation, more compression.
Right.
But it didn't sound fuzzier or more distorted. It just sounded more exciting. So I think he missed a trick going on to just add more preamp valves. I think he may have lost what he'd found in the early days and overlooked it, maybe.
Right. Me and Dave were talking about, I have a Master Volume 72, 73, it's like 73 actually,
All right.
replica.
Yep.
We built it off of, it was an exact copy of one of these amps that we think Chris Holmes owned. In fact, I'm 99% sure he owned it.
Oh, well.
But that amp you see in a lot of the Van Halen photos back in the day, the white Marshalls with the black,
the white, yeah,
with the black logo.
That's the rarest color, apparently.
Right, it was a rare color. My buddy has it in Los Angeles, in that area, San Dimas area. There's stories about how it was sold directly from Eddie to a guy through their recycler, through the local. And the guy picked it up. I don't. This is all unverified. I don't know this is just the stories that I'm hearing on the interwebs, as they say. But the thing about it is signed on the inside of the head box by Eddie Van Halen. The signature now, however, it doesn't really look period like 70s period. He could have had it. He could have kept it. He could have had it at 5150. He could have sold it later. I'm not sure, but that's not exactly the story. But again, I'm not real sure, but we took that amp and it was a master volume on that one.
Ah, okay.
And we copied it verbatim.
Mm-hmm.
And I have it. And Dave and I were talking about master volume versus Variac and where the distortion comes from in the circuit. And he was kind of going through that a little bit where, certain kinds of distortions, like I thought it was more power tube based by doing a master volume, but he said it's not so much. It's not as much in that component.
It's the phase inverter, isn't it?
Yeah. So that's where he was, pointing for that, and that again, like he said, it gives a different tone, especially when you come down in volume. Now, when I use it and I crank it up. Obviously pulling the master down, cranking the channels up. It gets very compressed, and it can get pretty gainy, but not the kind of, it gets the kind of ratty. So where the sweet spot is, it's still got a lot of sustain.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously when you're that loud, it's kind of, I mean, I'm still using the master volume, but when I'm down on the master volume, I'm still getting sustain out of this old design, right? So
I think
there's ways. Go ahead.
I was noticing that Ed bought a load of master volume heads after he lost the main one, didn't he? On tour in Japan, maybe 80, and they came back and his main Marshall got lost.
Yeah.
So apparently they went out and bought a load of replacement amps just really fast. They just went and bought whatever was available. And at that point, it was probably the master volumes were just coming in.
Right.
So a lot of the gigs that you heard then had those master volume amps on, and it does sound very different.
Yeah, right.
And then at various points, then he'd go back to using the classic amp as well.
Yeah, the 70s, I got a 77 JMP in my collection. And that's the classic AC/DC thing. You just, that's the thing. If you want to get your head blown off, and it's awesome.
Yeah. I wrote to Marshall, I think I was about 15, and I wrote to Marshall saying, please tell me what amps AC/DC used. And they sent me this list of unobtainable amps at the time as a 15-year-old kid. But yeah, I loved all that stuff. But the master volume amps, it's not very Eddie. It sounds too grain. It sounds wrong to say grainy because Eddie was the grainiest sound ever. But they're a bit more raspy and a bit more bitty. Right, and Eddie's sound was like carved rock. It was so defined, wasn't it?
Yeah. If you listen to the videos, I have this on my channel of that amp. We recorded it out there, and I went out there last winter, I said, and I went over to his house and we recorded it, with the 57 just real quick, but you can get a vibe for what it's like. And then I did a demo here in my home studio with the reproduction, much more controlled, much more time spent on getting it sound right. And sounds great. Sounds super.
Yeah.
But
did you do the Eddie mods? Did you do the Eddie mod of putting the the lower there's a value of the mid pot and all that stuff.
No, I didn't switch it. We were actually replicating this other amp.
Of course, yeah.
We could have done that, and he does do that. He can do that. Obviously build an exact copy of that. But I wanted that amp, and because it was different amp, and I love white. I have a white JCM 800 that I covet because that was something like the Docking video where they had the white cabinets.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember the white. I remember the red. Maybe sometimes people would have purple as well.
Yeah,
about 70.
I coveted colors, right? The Marshall colors. I coveted those colors like that. It's a collector thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I was endorsed by Marshall probably about 86 for a little. Well, I guess I still am endorsed by them. I just don't need to talk to them anymore. But but before that, I was at a trade show. I started going to the trade shows when I was about 16. And I went to the Marshall stand and I got to play on one of the amps there. It was one of the first times I'd played on a Marshall. And an old dude in a suit and white hair comes out and he listens to me play. And he goes, "You know how to make a Marshall sound like a Marshall." And I was like, "Oh, thanks." But I didn't know who he was. And he walked off. And I said to the guy who was showing me, I said, "Who's that?" He went, "Oh, he's called Ken Brann. He designed the Marshall."
All right.
I was like, oh my God, the man who designed it likes what I do. Right. So, yeah.
Did you ever meet Jim?
I never met Jim, but I've got a book signed by him to me, but I never met him, no. But I used to go to the factory quite a lot and just meet the artist liaison guy and see a few of the guys in the factory and stuff. But yeah, cool place.
I gotta get over there. I wanted to take that tour my entire life, obviously.
Oh, right. They've got a studio there now and a record label and everything.
Do that. Yeah, I saw their videos on that. And I met Jim a number of times at NAMM over my entire, since I was like a teenager myself. I was there in '87 when Eddie played with Steve Stevens and that jam they did in '87, and the one in '91 with the Ernie Ball guys and with Steve Morse. And
I love Steve Morse.
Howard Lee, that particular jam they had. I was at that jam, and so yeah, I've been at NAMM for years and years and years, and had a chance to interface with him, at NAMM a few times, and more than a few times. The guy was super. He would sit down every day and meet his customers every day.
Yeah,
for all day.
Yeah,
and he was he was probably in his late 50s when I first met him. And all the way till he passed, he was still.
Wow. Oh, that's great.
Crushing it like every day. It's like, there's stories of him going in the factory and building the cabinets himself and signing them. He would literally go work on the line. Or no, he Tolex them, I think is what he did.
Is that right?
Yeah,
he was a drummer first, wasn't he?
Yeah. So it's a pretty amazing story. His story with all of that and how that all kind of unfolded. But when I talked to Dave about how if it would have been, maybe I didn't really say this, but probably if it would have been a different time. Later, when signature things became an issue, maybe Eddie would have been on a signature Marshall lamp. I don't know, but
Marshall were really slow in those days to get involved with players or mods. They were very, very traditional. They were like, no, we build this, and professionals like to take it on tour. Right. But if you talk to them about doing some special tricks, they were like, we don't really do that. Which I think they did start to get into that mindset in the 80s, because I've got this Marshall over in the back here. This says Larshall on it. And if you look in the back of that one, it says to Def Leppard. It was built for Def Leppard. And it's got a few little tricks and things on the back. It's got like 100 to 50 watt switch. It's got an effects loop, which they didn't originally have on that first series. And it's a 4-input one, but it's also got a master volume they've just stuck on the end. Okay. And Def Leppard they've written on the side of it very good. So I think it would have been around the High and Dry period if you're a Def Leppard fan. Okay. That would have possibly been used live or on tour or whatever. But I think that was as far as they went.
Yeah, you were in Sheffield, so you were in their hometown.
Exactly. Yeah, my sister used to go out with lads who were in bands who were friends of Def Leppard, and I think that rubbed off on me, really. It was like there was a scene, and it seemed to be the cool thing to do when you get to the end of being a kid and you start your teens. You're like, okay, what do I do now? Come on, I want the exciting stuff. And it was guitar. Def Leppard were playing, and yeah, good period in Sheffield. It's a real rock city, you know.
So did you see them in a club, or you were too young?
No, I was never saw Def Leppard at a club actually. We'd go to the City Hall though, and we'd see the American bands, you know, like Y&T, bands like that. Just whoever was on tour, you know, from about 10 or 11, I'd go to see them at the City Hall.
Yeah.
Apparently, the lads who used to unload the gear told me the story of unloading the bomb for Van Halen out the back of the van on the Black Sabbath tour. This bomb lands on the ground and everyone just runs for miles and stuff. But yeah,
I bet over there because I've been over there to England a few times, and I was actually I told you I went to Dublin to see Alice Cooper. Well, it was Def Leppard.
Yeah.
It was Def Leppard on the top bill.
Oh right.
Alice Cooper and Thin Lizzy all together in Dublin. So
I love Thin Lizzy.
It was kind of a special. They only did 2 shows like that. It was there and up in the north, Belfast.
Oh, okay.
So they did those 2
Awesome.
shows. So I saw that show there, and that was probably 2010, maybe around that.
Oh, okay. 2010, yeah.
But then part of the deal I made with my father, which is an interesting story, was that the whole reason we were there is he wanted to play golf in Ireland.
Oh, okay.
These brutal west coast of Ireland courses, right?
Yeah.
And so we're in it's cold as all. It's in the May, okay, so it is pretty still cold,
fresh,
right?
Yeah, fresh.
It's very very windy, and my dad wanted to do this before he's too old that he couldn't really. He traps around all over these courses because they're really tough to walk anyway.
Yeah,
and most of them are walking. So my deal with my dad was that I wanted to go to Liverpool and see all the Beatles sites if we were going to do 8 days in a row. So I did 8 days in a row of golf with my father all over Ireland.
Were you playing or caddying?
I was playing. We had you had to hire a caddy. So we played to a place called Old Head, which is an amazing course that's out on the I forgot what channel I don't know if it's on the English channel. I can't remember. But Old Head was where some of the German subs came along, and I think it was sunk the Lusitania.
Oh wow! Okay.
So off this coast,
that sea's rough, between England and Ireland. All the bands go across on the ferry to on tour, and the sick as pigs when they get there. It's really rough. Can be. Yeah. Yeah.
So we went to Liverpool. We flew over and on Ryanair, and we did the whole thing for a day, and then we flew back and did the Alice Cooper show the same night.
Oh, cool! That's heavy going.
So I got my history lesson on the Beatles, including when you mentioned the bomb. That Ringo Starr was almost killed by a bomb when he was a child in one of the
right.
Yeah, a bomb hit close to his house there, and we were down in the area
where
we lived at the time. So for me, going over there was probably like for you coming to the United States. Seeing the row house, seeing everything I'd seen on TV, and knowing the history of the Beatles. It was a very emotional thing for me. It was like probably if you come from Europe to New York City or Europe to LA. It was just one of those things you just get a chance to do that. It's pretty cool.
You can breathe the air and feel what's in the place that makes that happen, can't you? You can see the people and work out why they needed to express themselves in that way. And you can definitely see it. And if you go to Pasadena and you hang in LA for a bit, you just get an idea for the more optimistic. See, we're all really like pessimistic, dour people in the UK. So the whole bright sunshine attitude's like, whoa, that's exotic. So yeah, you can feel it if you go there, and
I do feel that too, because in where I live in North Alabama near Huntsville. The famous thing that happened here was the Saturn V moon rocket was built. That was
right.
Sort of our city was formed around this whole event in the 60s. It was a small place before that.
Wow.
An army base, but basically, our area is pretty quiet, and our weather is kind of mixed bag. But in Los Angeles, like you said, it's always shiny and sunshiny, and the weather's great. And when I go to Pasadena, like this last trip when I went, I got to spend a lot of time with the locals there. And
right, okay.
Get into into the vibe for a week. I stayed there at the Saga Motel on the main drag, right across from Pasadena City College, where all the they got together.
Wow.
Right across the street.
Crazy.
It's on the parade route. And so I lived there for like a week, basically going all the sides to meet all these people, to do all these interviews, to get a real vibe, get a real feel for what it was.
Did you really absorb it, drink it in?
Yeah, feel it, feel just like to live there and be in that area. And it was an amazing trip, an amazing opportunity, and it's something I hope I get to do again this year and get some time to spend with these folks who were all there. They were taking me around to places like where Alex used to build his drums, and like
right.
in this room they practiced in this old mansion, actually, that's still there in town. And went to all those party sites, the houses where they had the house parties. I went
Did you see any of the gardens? Did you see how big these gardens were? I can only imagine they were like.
One of them was so big though that I couldn't. It was totally fenced all the way around. Huge.
Oh, house. Okay. They were big then, like big gigs, really.
Big, huge backyard parties. Yeah. So they're they're all over the place as far as that goes. But it was cool to see these neighborhoods. A lot of them over, obviously, of the era, they still have the same look. That one though, the bigger one, had a new house built there. But yeah, it was really cool to get in the mind of those people and what it was like to go to these parties, and like just something like the simple is like, when you go to Liverpool or whatever, you get a feel for the way the streets are constructed, and in your mind you kind of get a real picture, right?
Yeah, totally.
There on the streets, it's all really flat, really long streets. So it was really easy to park on the sides of the street and like park for miles, right? Because you could.
Okay.
It was just like that kind of vibe, right? So it was just kind of cool to kind of go, okay, how did 1,500 people get in a backyard? Well, it could have, because these streets go for miles and they're really flat. Yeah.
You work a lot out, don't you, when you get there? A lot of people wonder about Sheffield, why there's such a rock scene. And it happens that Sheffield's main commodity was steel. And so we had all these big, huge factories that were just beating steel. And so like the sound of like hardcore, metal being struck and things, it was kind of in the blood of a lot of the working class guys. And they weren't scared of, big clangorous metallic, heavy sound. And I think that might have had something to do with the UK or the Sheffield heavy metal thing. So it's possible that all these different places have a small effect in the style.
Sure, like Shoals has a little bit of a vibe too, like that. There's that's such a R&B and a classic, 60s, 50s. For those songs and that music. And what was funny is I didn't even know much about it until I went up there about 10 or 15 years ago, before they released the documentary on it. And I had a friend who actually had the studio, the Russell Shoals studio. They owned it, and it was in disrepair at the time. Apple bought it, and Beats, I think, invested in it to refurb it after that documentary. So it's brand new. It's like the same as it was back in the day. But I got to go in there when it was rough, before that they did any, refurbs. And there's still writing on the wall from all the artists that had been there, like Bob Seger and the Rolling Stones, all these people. Because that particular room is the room that Old Time Rock and Roll was recorded in, Brown Sugar.
Yeah. Wow. Did it have the original equipment still in it, Jeff?
At that time, no. He had pieces of it. But what they did is they went back and they got an API console that's in there now. And they do have a modern Pro Tools rig in there, fairly modern. And and I don't know whether they're actually running any tape, but they do use it still as but it's mainly as a tour now.
Right. Oh yeah, an experience tour. Yeah.
It's awesome. It's awesome to know what all came out of that one little building, and it has a very unique, like spaces, like the way this building was built. It was built on concrete blocks, and the floor is that weird. I don't know if it was linoleum, but it's like almost a rubberized kind of thing.
Yeah, linoleum.
And they had a lot of carpet on the floors too, so it has like a thing to it. Like there's something about that room.
That's unusual. From playing gigs, you're you'll be all over this, but when you get on those stages where it's not open, it's solid. It's not just like a nice wooden space underneath. It's just solid, and those sound the worst, don't they?
Oh yeah.
Your amp just sounds sterile and terrible. So I can only imagine that for some reason that must have been useful to them. But normally you want
underneath there was a whole garage. Well, not garage, but it would have been a garage. But actually, it was kind of like a hangout area. And downstairs, and then there was back then that place was dry. You couldn't drink alcohol.
Right.
There's a little nip room off to the.
Fantastic. Get the essentials sorted.
Right. So they had a little bar shoved down in there.
Wow.
And so the roof of the garage or whatever is the floor of the studio.
Okay, I get it.
Actually have a lower, the whole lower part of the house. It's kind of like a building, but it's like an old house would have been where you have your garage underneath, and so there's this resonance that happens with the floor. I think
those musicians,
yeah, right,
with a drink.
It's such a cool thing, though. You're talking about, like you said with the stages. I was just on. This is such a weird thing, though. Last week or this weekend, we played on our big lake out here. And we were on a engineered hardwood deck, and behind us was nothing but the lake. In front of us was all our PA, right? And I ran it and did all that, and I'd go out front and I'd be like, "Man, the sub is kicking ass," but back here there's nothing.
No, you need a back wall.
Right? There was no resonance, no wall. We were on a dock. So there was no, you could just tell, though. It was so, like, if you'd put subs in cardio to relieve the sub coming back at you. That's what that felt like. It was like there was nothing.
Right. No, it's flimsy, isn't it? It just washes away. Right. Yeah, there's certain things you need in a concert, and you need that feeling that you're beaming out from a box.
Is this on?
That's how it works.
On?
Yeah,
I told the story about Eddie last episode, but I went and saw him in Atlanta in 2007, and he was doing. He goes into Eruption, right? And as soon as he goes, I mean, literally, like the second he hits the first few notes, the whole PA goes down.
Christ!
So he didn't notice because his stuff was up pretty loud on stage. He didn't notice right away, anyway. And then he was like, like. And then can y'all hear me? Like, yeah. And then
man,
the crowd was like thinking, I think they were all thinking, oh, somebody's gonna be in trouble for this. And so everybody started chanting Eddie, 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 and he just kind of chilled and took a minute, but the whole PA finally came back up. But I've never seen a whole PA go down like that.
No. I bet he handled it well though, didn't he? I bet he was cool.
Yeah, he did. He was fine. And then once he came back up, he just continued on, and it's all great.
Yeah,
he always is.
Nice.
So tell me about your channel. What's your plans for the future? What are you gonna kind of? I mean, because your content really, have you just started this channel?
Yeah. 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks ago. Not long at all. Really, I've been putting it off for about 2 years because I just don't like to shoot my mouth off, really. But I've been absorbing so much of this material. I just thought, no, I've got to record this now, and I've got to just share where I'm at and see if anybody's interested. So yeah, it's gone well.
You've already.
I plan to do. Sorry.
Your subs are growing pretty quick. Your views are really big.
Yeah.
On videos, and I think the way that you presented it, that's key. The way that you came across that. We talked about it in our exchanges, but when I first started out, I was kind of scared to go out there and talk about.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And so many people are experts, and you don't want to jump in and pretend you're an expert and overshoot. See, I don't want to overshoot myself. I don't want to be sort of like claiming things that I've got no idea about. I'm more into just sharing the love of it, the sound that I've got, and talking about what sort of secrets there might have been. Maybe dispel a few myths, but I certainly can't profess to have had any inside knowledge because I don't know those guys. I've just got my ears, and they keep like wiggling when I don't hear the right thing. I can hear somebody play a great vintage plexi with a northern ash bodied Strat with a humbucker in it, and I'm still going, nah, there's something missing. There's something not there, and that keeps driving me on. So yeah, I'll probably expand what I'm doing to look at things like playing techniques, how to play some of the songs, and I'm open to suggestions and stuff as well. But I'm just enjoying sharing the love of it. Really, it's just sharing the love, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and that's why I picked up on it pretty quickly. I mean, I track anything and everything that's out there with the Van Halen, and I started contributing to the Van Halen news desk about 3 months ago as a contributor. They asked me to be part of that, and which was
cool,
a great honor because I had been reading this since I was before the dawn of the internet or whatever. Before that, actually, when they had the Inside Magazine, Van Halen store, all that stuff. But before there were groups and Facebook and all those things. So it was kind of cool.
You've been welcomed into the club, haven't you? You've gone into the inner sanctum. You're Chief Mason, right?
It seems that way, and it's so part of my job as that contributor is to find unique videos like yours and try to share those. I don't have final say on any of it, but I do, have the ability to share it with them and see if they will share it to the world.
Oh, it's very cool. Yeah, very cool.
Pretty cool. So I do find little things like the Nuno interview from Brick Beato that was very Eddie Van Halen centric, and I don't think that. Yeah, I think that people needed to know that it was so that centric, so they didn't miss it.
Yeah. Yeah. Nuno loves Ed, doesn't he?
Oh my God, yeah. It was mostly an Ed tribute.
Good.
I loved it. I loved it, man.
Yeah, it's the best.
It was something. So we'll talk about the crowds a little bit more before we sign off here. In England, you were saying that the crowds, because of the general, like the vibe of the cities and the darkness and the rain and all this, I talked a little bit about that, but
let me tell you about it. Jeff. So I grew up in the 70s, and in the 70s, I thought everything was black and white. And I don't mean the television. I mean, actual life was black and white. It really was like a very dour place to live. And I think by about 80, it was starting to change. And that sort of happened slowly. So a lot of the people stayed kind of a little bit more, the rock fans, they still stayed traditional and kind of, and that's what affected the crowd, really. I think it's just a very, very different mindset to go forward into the 80s rock with the bands like Crew and Poison and Rat and all those bands. It wasn't complaint rock anymore. It wasn't sort of grunty. I'm trying to think of the right word, but rock used to be more about complaint. And then the LA vibe brought in this new thing, it was more about having a good time and about girls and just hedonism, I guess, combined with a lot of great guitar playing. And that split the crowd. It really did. I remember watching it. It was like very much the new breed versus the old breed. I think it was just a big fashion change.
Yeah, in England is what you're saying. That way that it's,
in England.
Okay, so for me, growing up in the 80s, I tied right into Iron Maiden, Priest, obviously Sabbath. So we got, our taste of hard rock from those fathers of hard rock, right? And even you were saying a minute ago that Sheffield's a steel town. Well, Birmingham, Alabama, where I grew up, is a steel town, obviously named after Birmingham, England. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. Hey, do you know what? Can I throw in a quick aside here?
Go ahead.
I got through the AC/DC fan club. They gave me a backstage pass to Birmingham. Birmingham.
Yeah, right.
On the For Those About to Rock tour, and I got it in time that when I went to see them in Birmingham, UK, I'd got this little pass, and I was like, I'm going to try this. So I went up to the guys and I was like, showed them my pass. It says Birmingham. They're like, come on. This is the wrong Birmingham, wrong country. But I nearly got backstage. I would have, but it did say Birmingham on it. But I should have handed it to you. You could have got backstage on the For Those About to Rock tour.
Right. Right. Yeah, they came through. Let's see. Well, obviously, Back in Black, I'm pretty sure. And then they came through, and they were about to come through in '83, I think, for Flick of the Switch, but they canceled for some reason. They did come on through for what was the Stephen King movie? The Thunderstruck. That tour.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Razor's Edge. I can't remember. Anyway, they did come and I didn't see them. but I had the flu.
Oh.
So I was in the audience and I was and get my head
terrible
at the same time. But it was cool. It was cool to see him. It's still awesome to see him. But yeah, that whole thing.
Yeah.
You know, like if I go back to my childhood, you know, with Black Sabbath, I had actually interviewed Joel Holkstra from Whitesnake and Night Ranger.
All right.
And
very cool.
We both had our first song we could play all the way through was Black Sabbath's Paranoid.
Okay. Yeah.
Because it was for a beginner, it's a fairly, you know, cool, straightforward fifth chord kind of thing.
Hammer-ons too.
Yeah, right. So you had a little bit of all of that, right, going on. And but the difference was I was introduced to this song through Speak of the Devil, Ozzy's live album.
Okay, yeah.
Which is Brad Gillis.
Randy Rhoads.
Brad Gillis.
Oh, Brad Gillis on that, right.
Right. So the funny part is Joel and I both learned it from Speak of the Devil.
Mm-hmm.
Joel ended up playing with Brad Gillis, of course.
And
I saw Brad at NAMM, and he had his original red guitar that he played on
I love that guitar.
With him that day because they were doing a replica.
Wow.
And I was like, dude, I got to tell you this. I learned Paranoid from you off that record.
Yeah.
That's how I was introduced to Black Sabbath. But yeah, then
Crazy.
I got into new wave of British heavy metal and all of those bands. You know, those were Maiden was huge for me. Still is a great show that I just saw just a few years ago again. They're just as good as they ever were, and an amazing band and such amazing history. You know, we always talk about how Zeppelin picked up the British the British people picked up, like, well, Zeppelin in particular, the Delta blues was their kind of American music that they kind of got, but we kind of got the new wave of British heavy metal where you guys got hair metal or whatever it became.
It's like a relay race. We're just passing backwards and forwards.
Right, passing back and forth across the pond, right? And it's really cool to share that stuff with Hendrix coming over there, becoming popular in England before he really, blew up in America.
I know. Crazy, right? I think every 8 years it changes direction. It's like some weather condition that takes 8 years to change. But yeah, we're happy to pass backwards and forwards, aren't we? Because we're the English-speaking nations, and I think because I work a lot in Europe making music, and they love the English-speaking naturals, as you guys and us Brits, and they really revere us because it's our authentic language rather than one that we have to learn and to think consciously through. We speak it unconsciously, so we can speak it from the heart. Okay. So yeah, I think that's the reason why the UK and America seem to be always at the forefront of rock and pop.
Interesting, because that's an interesting fact. Yeah, I was thinking about when I was a kid, I loved the Scorpions.
Oh, me too.
And if, being a German band, and I was always kind of like, how do they, what is it that makes them want to sing in English? Is it because they were influenced by American bands or English bands?
You know the answer?
No, you tell me.
It was the Beatles. Klaus Meine. He was a Beatles freak, and apparently his main goal was to just make a pop song as good as the Beatles could. Right. And it had to be English to make that sound. The phonetic sound. I don't know if you've ever heard a lot of German. Well, not a lot of German rap, but I've heard German rap, and it's the scariest thing you've ever heard. It's just so aggressive, Right. Like it's a slightly more strong sounding language, isn't it? Yes. And it doesn't communicate sort of poetry of lyric quite as nicely as the English language does. So I think that's part of it.
So there's this band, is it Rammstein? Right?
Oh, Rammstein, yeah.
Yeah, so they're a German band, right? I don't know much about them. I know they're heavy and they're popular and they're a show.
Yeah, I don't know much about them either. I sort of the last German band I was into was Accept. Do you remember Accept?
Sure, of course.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. I thought Balls to the Wall was a great album.
Yeah, their new guitar player out of Nashville was one of the guests on here.
Oh, really? Oh, cool.
Philip Shouse, yeah. Philip Shouse was he was drafted by Gene Simmons to be in a solo band, and then ended up in Accept. With the new singer, and he was doing some of those shows where Accept was in Europe and on festivals doing like a classical set. Where Wolf Hoffman was doing sort of his neoclassical thing.
Right. Yeah, the Germans love that. In the 80s, I was asked to join a band that were doing all that called Halloween. I don't know if you ever heard of Halloween.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, their guitarist Kai Hansen left, and I was in between two bands. So I ended up learning all of their set. Never worked out in the end, but it's just one of those gigs that never worked out. Mm-hmm. Another one was I did the Aussie audition as well. Wow. So before Jakey Lee. So that was another thing that didn't work out, but good experience though, all the same.
Right. Well, that's geez. I mean, those are amazing bands and lineages and legacies that just keep going on. And that's sort of like the thing with Van Halen. It's like one of the reasons why I even started this thing. And I basically, when I was, before he passed, I kind of felt like Van Halen would take care of their own legacy.
Right.
But then they haven't. Yeah, then he passed, and then it's been like nothing. Of course, there's all the politics inside the band, and Wolfgang said himself, it's a very difficult situation, and I guess maybe it'll be end up in his hands eventually. And I met him, and I found that he was very up on his father's legacy and very much a fan as any of us. He would sit down with any of us probably and have the same discussions and love to talk about it, but. It's going to be all over the internet tomorrow if he does. Because now, when he even says one thing, a little snippet, it gets put all over.
Newsflash.
Okay,
Jeff, I've got something to ask you, buddy. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, I've got this problem with Running with the Devil, which is that the chorus, Running with the Devil, does the push thing, right? They started doing it wrong, didn't they, Van Halen?
Yeah, they did that.
And they started singing it on the beat. Running with the devil. Yeah. Why? Do you know anything about that story? Because I know they fixed it by Jimmy Kimmel in 2015. They were doing it correct again.
I don't know. There's another song they did that on. I want to say it was on the Donington Show. That there was one of the other songs that they had moved the melody around a little bit. My theory is that because if you go back to the bootlegs, they were doing it. I think the way on the record, right? So I don't know why.
So
they staggered it later. I have no idea why they moved that around. I mean, and they were doing.
I've heard it from '76, and they were doing it perfectly in '76, all the way through to them recording it.
Yeah,
and then it kind of just went wrong straight away. But it's hard to sing and play that at the same time, though, isn't it? It's hard to sing the push beat and to play the on beat.
Yeah, it's pretty hard.
But I think it was Dave who was doing it wrong, though. I think the rest of the guys were doing it right.
I always go back to if it's with a melody issue, it's Roth for some reason. I don't know why he would want to do that, but I know Michael was obviously in on it. He was singing the harmony to it in that time.
Yeah.
And I had always heard that weird thing live that I was just like, why are they changing the melody? But by 2015, the Van Halen brothers were probably like, whatever, just sing it however you want to sing it.
Yeah.
Because I would love to get Roth.
That's crazy.
I would love to talk to Roth, but it's like talking to the Riddler, man.
You're so right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, you'd get a whole philosophy about it, but you might not get the actual piece of information.
Don't get anything. That's what if you look at Jazz Rex interview, Eddie says in there that. We could let him loose with somebody for an hour, and after he's done, they don't know what he said. But the whole time, they're dazzled. He dazzles them, and then they don't remember a thing he said.
It's a mystery ride. It's a mystery ride, but it's a good ride.
Yeah. Well, he had that.
Hey, listen. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask, have you seen the Montreal Monsters of Rock from '84 as well? That's just out now.
Montreal Monsters of Rock?
Yeah. It was on that tour, but they came to Montreal. Okay. And I've just saw it a couple of nights ago. It was April the 19th, I think. So it must have been before Donington.
Was it indoor or outdoor?
It was an indoor. And he was using the proper Marshall, and he had the tray table flip-up guitar mod. And it sounds amazing. And his guitar sound is full Brown sound. It's just amazing. So, the ideas that his amp had died by that point aren't true,
Yeah, that I've seen that video, though. It's cleaned up. It's a new one. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I thought I hadn't seen it before, but yeah. To compare that to the UK Donington performance, it's much better. It looks like the real Van Halen again.
That's what I was going to say to you is when we were talking about Donington, I was comparing it to that video as in, okay, what were their set lists? What were their segues? What were they having to switch around from that they'd been so used to doing prior?
Yeah, because they were rehearsed for that point. Yeah.
Right. I mean, by that point, you're doing it in your sleep, right? So, so all of a sudden, it's a throw and go.
Mix it all up, see what happens.
Just whoa, get out there, boys! How many people were actually at that Donington thing? Because it's conflicting.
Yeah. They say it was a 60-ish capacity, 60,000. Okay. I'm really bad at judging like crowds. I can't see it, but it was a big crowd.
It looks more than 30, but I don't know. There was a show I went to, the Monsters of Rock. Kind of it was a takeoff of I guess the European Monsters of Rock when Van Halen went around the United States doing stadiums, and I went to that in '88. And there were probably 50,000 people there at that show that I went to in Memphis, and that was I think the only stadium show that I've ever been to. Scorpions were awesome that day. And by the time Van Halen came on, I was so tired, man. I couldn't make it.
Yeah.
I had been upset. I hadn't slept the night before because my buddies and I drove over there. And then, I was.
It's hard work, isn't it? It's real hard work going to festivals.
105 degrees. And, we'd been there for 12, 14 hours. So it was brutal. But yeah. Yeah, but that was a good show. It was cool, and then we had some really interesting cup fights. Like throwing cup. I saw this in the Donington footage where they're throwing cups. Right there was like you could see.
Oh yeah, on stage, yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, I remember the bit where Dave said, don't throw that on stage again, or I'm there for your girlfriend. What?
Right.
And we just thought it was a line. It just sounded like a Daveism.
It is.
And then you actually got to see there was a real bottle that landed on. I was like, oh, that's great. It actually made some sense. It was a perfect riposte,
Right. Well, when we had a cup fight at the Memphis show, and everybody that talks about this concert that was there, the entire stadium burst into a spontaneous throwing of cups up and down from the
against each other, right?
The floor and the sides, and it was the entire stadium was enveloped,
wet. Yeah.
It was something to see, boy. I never seen anything like that in my life. But man, I want to thank you for coming on. And the Donington thing is a really kind of a hot topic that I wanted to, getting your viewpoint, being there yourself. That's amazing. And then getting the mental picture from your standpoint at that time, and different factions of your countrymen as far as the way that they were thinking musically. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, there was a lot of it. It was an interesting time. It really was. And they were the head of the new school, and the old school was just letting go of the style. So it was kind of a passing over, really. And so a lot of people who didn't want to change didn't really take it nicely. But then the kids who hadn't experienced years of classic rock, who were just ready for a new 80s sound, they totally embraced it. And that was my age group.
Yeah, the whole thing too is that there was it's weird because I've been in an '80s band on and off for decades, and we would kind of split between what I now I'm doing more of my own as a arena rock '80s, more the Def Leppard, band,
right,
versus the skinny tie '80s, I call it
the new wave,
the fix, the flux, all that. So how was that particular movement at that time in that area?
Yeah, so that's when I started buying records, about 79, and you got Blondie, you got The Knack, bands in the UK, Stiff Little Fingers, all these kind of they were new wave bands, weren't they? Slightly punky, slightly spiky new wave. And that was the mainstream, I think, in the UK. That was like mainstream pop.
Okay.
So to hear this exotic rock, that was just like everything turned up, it was just it was too exciting to ignore, really. Yeah. But yeah, the UK was very much in the new wave sort of, and New Romantic was big in the early 80s as well. New Romantic was a horrible moment, really. I don't know. stylistically it was horrible. Musically it was quite nice, I think, but yeah,
The
it was a
punk,
look.
punk scene now, that how was that?
Yeah.
How was that time frame as well? Was it
Yeah, the punk scene was maybe just a bit earlier than that. So probably be about 77, 78. You got bands in the UK like Sham 69, obviously the Sex Pistols and stuff like that. And it sounded good. I mean, it was kind of like they called it punk as though it was some separate thing, but it just sounded like pub rock to me, like exciting pub rock, And then that pub rock then turned into new wave, where it was more produced and it was tighter and it was to a click, and the songs sounded like more appealing pop songs rather than complaint messages. But yeah, that's the way it transitioned. And then by about 82, the rock thing started growing in mainstream popularity. So Rainbow, Rush, AC/DC, Van Halen, they started to be taken as a mainstream thing rather than a sort of an underground rock thing. And it was nice. It was nice to get that recognition, really. I remember feeling quite validated that, the music was keeping going and was getting popularized. Yeah.
Van Halen they came in 78 to England, which is where the Def Leppard guys both saw, but well, at least Rick and Phil both.
Yeah, they'd have seen him at Sheffield City Hall in about 78. Yeah.
I had talked to Rick actually when I was at one of the art exhibits and in Florida, and I had a minute to talk to him, and I asked him about it, about the Van Halen thing. He was really blown away by Van Halen, and
I bet.
And was telling me about that. He said he was 16. He was just joining Leppard at the time, around that point. And when he saw Van Halen, and of course, Phil Collin met Eddie at that time, and it's what inspired him to put a humbucker in his guitar and do all what ended up that guitar used on Hysteria.
Yeah.
Pour some sugar on me, But
yeah. Rick Savage he's out in Sheffield quite often. I was supposed to be doing some work with his son's band as well, who they're a modern rock band. So he's not in an ivory tower somewhere. He goes out and about.
Yeah, that's funny because they are like this. They're Phil Collin and Phil's. I've met him multiple times. And he's got the wildest memory. Like he can remember anything, like any gig. It's the strangest thing. Like I talked to him about a gig that I met him at 3 years prior, and he was like, "Was that outside and on the night after Halloween?" And I was like,
"Wow,
was it raining?" He goes, "Was it raining?" And I'm like, "You remember it was raining 3 or 4 years ago."
Dude, you're not drinking enough.
Like, well, he goes,
that's crazy.
He goes, well, because it was the last day of the tour, and it was also Rick's birthday.
Oh, okay, memorable. Yeah,
so I was working that show with my buddy who said, "You want to come down and work the Journey Def Leppard show?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'll come down and hang out."
So.
Yeah, I was wandering around the dressing room looking at all their stuff.
Oh, wicked! That's very cool.
Fun, just checking it out. I did get to carry Neil Sean's one of his Les Pauls in from the mail carrier when they brought one of his Les Pauls in, so I got to bring it up. So
he's great. What a guitar player!
Yeah,
have you heard him playing the Eddie stuff recently?
Yeah, I have, and he had a great period with Eddie in that first 78 tour. Somebody I really wanted to get on. Eventually, hopefully, we'll get him to talk about it more in detail.
Wow.
There's a whole thing where, the whole tapping thing, where it came from, right? This whole rabbit hole that everybody goes down about this. But I put some video up on my Instagram of Harvey Mandel tapping on a video from the 90s of Harvey tapping. And it's just, it is the quintessential, with the triplets and the whole thing.
What year?
Huh?
What year do you think was that?
That was actually later on in his career, but he said that Neil Sean said in an interview in one of the books that came out, one of the early Eddie Van Halen books. It's like the very first biography ever written in the 80s, a little bitty small book.
Yeah.
That Neil Sean said that Eddie told him when he cornered him about where he got the tapping, he said, "Oh, Harvey Mandel used to do something like that."
Yeah. So I've heard that.
So then another time, the guy I just had on here, Matt Blackett from Guitar Player Magazine, who wrote one of the last tribute issues. He was at a show it was at a Jeff Beck show and Neil Sean was in the hallway, and Neil Sean goes, "Hey, Matt, this is the guy that taught Eddie how to tap," and it was Harvey Mandel.
What? Oh, really? Yeah. That's fascinating. So it absolutely plagues my mind. By 76, he wasn't tapping, was he? And then between 76 and 77, recording the album, he's the master of tapping, and it changes the world. I mean, what is that about? But have you heard Steve Hackett?
Yeah.
So there's a Steve Hackett track which is very, very, very similar to Eruption. I don't know if you're aware of it.
Yeah, a little bit.
And yeah, his Steve Hackett's cousin or brother, maybe brother, lives just down the road here in Sheffield. Okay. And he kept talking about Steve Hackett, and I'd never really got into Steve. So I was like, oh, yeah, that's great. You know, and then I hear this song that he's done that's like Eruption. And I'm like, I've got to call this guy immediately and talk to him. So it's a bit rude of me. But yeah, I heard of a similar thing.
Check it out.
It's something like Fantasy or Fantasia or something. Yeah, yeah, about 74 or something like that. And it happens after a minute or so. It's just like, oh my God. I mean, it's so close, it's ridiculous. I'm not saying, because I mean, we've all had those coincidences where we've written something like somebody else's and we never heard it. So I'm not saying Eddie nicked it at all, but it's a very big coincidence, really is.
Well, there's a story of you know, his buddy Terry Kilgore taking a lesson from Harvey Mandel, and then him showing it.
Yeah,
that's the story you hear from the locals.
I believe that one
about it, and people that were actually maybe even in the room when this happened.
Right,
showing it to him. Of course, unverified, but just that's the talk most of the time from the Pasadena area. But yeah, you know,
makes sense.
But like you said, though, you know, what he did with it in that time frame, and just
blew the doors off, man.
Well, yeah, if you listen to the bootlegs in 76, 77, you start to hear, you know, a lot of pretty cool things in there that some of it he had in the end of Eruption late in 77, you know, that he took off.
Yeah.
You know, kind of edited them out that are really awesome parts too, but are more, I wouldn't say stock like classic rock licks, but they're more in that vein. And so, yeah, and the thing about Eruption, and this is the thing that I don't know if I said it much on here, but that's the only time that you hear that exact version.
I know. It's crazy. It's the best version, and he only did it once.
Right.
And apparently it's got a mistake in it, apparently.
Right. But it's funny.
Such a problem, that mistake.
I'm sure there are super close versions out there on the bootlegs, but as far as I remember, I don't know if there's one that's exactly that same, because they're either longer or they're not in the same order, or there's a lot of a live video that came out of that one show in Fresno, you know, when he's doing the solo.
Oh yeah, Fresno.
You know, it's like nowhere. It's more like what you see later in his career, as he goes through this much longer version. You know, so how they capture this. What throws me about it is, if I was to ask Don Landy or Eddie, how was this 1 minute and whatever version when you're rehearsing for your show? How did this come out to be this short?
I know, but I think what I've noticed from talk about the songs and the construction is that they were very component based. Like they'd have an outro in a song, and then they wouldn't care if that outro had to get bolted onto a different song, or if the riff from this one got moved into this one. I think Ed was very happy with these component parts. And so Eruption, he probably thought of it as a number of component parts, and he would just deploy them when he felt right, you know, and his skill set was at that point just on fire. So it sounded like it was a perfectly woven composition. But he was probably literally going through, because you know the segs in between where he does a bar dive and brings it up slowly, and there's a moment of stillness. That's probably one component finished, and then he moves on to another one. So I think that was part of his ethos, maybe.
Yeah, you know that you were talking about that one spot where that's when it feeds back in the original tape. You know, when you hear that room, you hear it feed back all of a sudden, and they let down for a minute on that. But yeah, it's amazing that what you're saying. He I had this discussion about the Donington footage, that when you're watching the solo, there's aspects, there's elements, moments where it's not typical.
No.
Okay, and you call it improvised if you want, or whatever, however you want to say it. But yes, there were components, like you said, there were components that he kind of had in his bag, and then he would deploy them at any moment, whether that was off the cuff or not. He had it so ingrained in his language that it was like speaking.
Exactly. His technique was at such a point at that point that he could turn his volume to 1 and play in front of Donington crowd a guitar solo. That is the scariest thing I've ever heard. Yeah. Clean, backed off volume, and you're going to do your guitar solo. It's mental. It's crazy.
He did that run you do in your video where he comes up, the A scale or A minor scale.
The triplets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really clean, which is, I was like, like he said, I was like, oh God, dude, turn the gain up a little bit.
But for academic reasons, it's good to watch,
Yeah, oh yeah, I thought that it was cool to watch that solo, because if you watch the solos from '84, like in Montreal, right? It had elements of that, but there was a lot of, like, he did that little blues jam in '84, and beautiful tone, where it kind of clean.
Yeah. I think he had. This is why I think reamping or slaving was part of it, because you get this different relationship with your volume control. If you turn it down to 1, it still sounds potent, like a good clean guitar sound. It doesn't just sound like you've reduced your distortion and you've ended up sounding too quiet. It has like its own character at 1 or 2, and it changes into different amps as you turn it up with the slaving. And that's why I think he could do that, is because it gives you more gas in the tank. It's a strange phenomenon. Until you've played it, you can't understand or appreciate the difference in feel. But it's a really cool feel to play that kind of amp, or double amp, shall we say.
It's interesting. It's interesting because you're talking about the feel of it. And one of the things I noticed about Neil Sean was his secret weapon on his pedal board. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but
what is it?
I don't know how secret weapon it is really, but it is on his pedal board. It's been on there and stays on there. It's with his Fractal today. His Boss compressor he uses, and he cranks.
Yeah, which one? Which one do you know?
When the C3, I think it is, or 1.
I think it might be a CS. Well, basically, the guitarist in my band at the time used to get wicked harmonics with the CS2 compressor, and then they brought the CS3 out. He bought it, and it didn't do the harmonics anymore. So it might be that Neil had the CS2.
All right, I have to look at his current pedal board, but it's on there, and he has. I don't know if it's level wide open or what. It's like taped wide open, And I'm like, I got to get one of those.
Does it work?
I don't know. I haven't gotten one. I need to get one and try it.
Well, get the CS2, Jeff. Definitely get the CS2 as opposed to the CS3. They're a bit rarer, but they are really cool.
There's something about that whole thing with him. And he, like I said, it's still on his pedal board with the Fractal. And I'm like, okay.
Wow.
The
old and the new.
Do that in the Fractal. Yeah. I don't know, but if there's something about it that's different that he just gravitates towards. But yeah, one of the things that I love about Neil is his intonation. It's just so spot on, man. His intonation. It was interesting when he tapped.
That's what I loved about Ed.
Yeah. He was real. They're both really fluid. Like they both have that thing where they can like he was so Ed was so into Holdsworth. Like that whole vibe that Holdsworth would do with that fluidity, and that was something I loved about Ed, was when he had
totally.
I picked up that whole legato or semi-picked legato from him, obviously.
Did you get into Holdsworth as well? Did you enjoy that?
I love Holdsworth. it's more, certainly nobody but a musician that really appreciates that jazz or modern fusion, whatever you want to call it. Because I don't know what you would call it actually, because it's so on its own,
It is.
Right.
Very singular. Yeah. It sounds more like Debussy through an electric guitar to me.
Yeah, it's just, it is totally mind blowing. And I did have a chance to meet Alan right before the year before he passed, and he was super cool. And
he was a lovely bloke, wasn't he? Yeah,
he was a great guy. And one of my buddies worked with him on a session or something. And one of the guys that's been on here. And
All right.
yeah, and
I went to a trade. Sorry, carry on.
Kurt James was worked with him, and
Uh,
I think he played Kurt James's Ibanez Destroyer, the one that's one of those 76. You know what I mean?
oh, I can't imagine Alan playing a destroyer.
I can't remember exactly, but there is a picture. I think Kurt showed me or gave me that has Alan with it.
Oh, wow.
Really
Crazy combination.
right? You would never think that, but yeah,
No.
Holdsworth was just, the reason I think Ed just dug it was because it was so outside. He was so
Yeah. Ed wanted fresh material, didn't he? I think Ed wanted that inspiration that nobody could give him because Ed's musical mind was bigger than anybody's at the time.
right.
And then Alan comes along and shows him a new possibility, a new world. And yeah, I could imagine that that's the only thing that got Ed excited. I went round a trade show with Alan once. I just said, "Oh, you're Alan Holdsworth. I love you. You're brilliant." And he said, "Oh, do you want to come and walk round?" So I walked round for the day with him.
Really?
And we went to the bar. Yeah, man. And he gave me a copy of his, I think it was Sand, the album at the time, on cassette.
Yeah.
And we went to the bar, and the guy from Marshall was taking the absolute piss out of him, saying, "Oh, what are you endorsing today then, Alan? Who's giving you free gear today and all this?" And Alan was just like, didn't care. He was a gentle, quiet soul, wasn't he? Quite a unique person.
Yeah, he seemed really, really, easy to be around.
Yeah.
And a genius, And that's funny that Marshall guy was giving him a hard time. Because he used a lot of, there's a whole nother ethos of what he used and what the gear that he went through and the different kinds of guitars that he played with, all those different, from the Charvels to these carbons.
Yeah.
It's like all over the place, but it was always him. And always what he did.
Every week there was a new guitar or a new amp, wasn't there? But the Hartley Thompson thing I mentioned, the local guitar builders from Sheffield, those guys built the amp. And a lot of people are trying to make folklore that that's what Ed used on Beat It.
Okay. That's not
the Hartley Thompson amp. I don't think that's true at all.
Well, here's what I was told, and by the person who supposedly rented his amp for Beat It.
Oh, right, okay.
Greg Leon, who's on here, he was in Dubrow with Kevin Dubrow after Randy Rhoads left to go to Austin. Okay,
right.
When he in the '80s, Andy Brower, who was the local gear backline person,
rental,
okay, that Dave Friedman worked for.
Yep.
Brower didn't have, I guess he didn't have what Eddie wanted. Eddie was on a break from Diver Down.
Okay.
So
makes sense, yeah.
I understand it. So he didn't have his gear because it was out on trucks.
Right.
You would think there'd be something at 5150, but I don't know. But anyway, this is where it gets a little confusing. Like, why would he not have anything at home? Anyway, so the story goes that Brower reached out to Greg Leon. Greg Leon had a Marshall Super Bass 100 watt. He rented it for $100 from Greg Leon. Greg Leon gave it to Andy Brower. Andy Brower picked Eddie Van Halen up at the airport. He said, I believe that's what he said to me. He said this to me on a Marshall forum because somebody put my video up.
Yeah.
And then he started to talk about it underneath, and then I interacted with him, and he gave me the whole story. Picked him up in his Porsche, drove him to Westlake Studios, I believe it was, which is another point of contention where it was done. And then Eddie did it in 30 minutes, and that was it. That's what was told. Now, there's the other part about them cutting the tape up and rearranging.
Totally.
Which you would think would take a lot longer than 30 minutes to rearrange.
But I like the story of it being an amp that got rented for him that he didn't rent. That checks out a little bit because Ed said that the amp was arranged for him. He just said, "Get me a Marshall head." But that surprises me because did Ed think that any Marshall head would sound like Ed? That surprises me.
Dave Friedman didn't think a super bass would be the choice, but that's what Greg Leon told me. Greg's background, in that scene goes all the way back to where Quiet Riot and Van Halen faced off at that one show that we all know about.
Right.
Is that that show, Front Row?
Oh, wow. Okay. That's history.
Tells that story in our interview, which has been very popular in my videos, as you can imagine. because I think it's Gunslingers of Glendale or something like that. I forget what exactly I named it, but it's basically that show and his experience with that show and his experience with Randy, because Randy and him were buddies, so he knows a lot about Randy's history, including the Concorde and all those other things that we
right
about, so the guitars and stuff. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the case that Leon did that. Leon, the problem that Greg has is he doesn't have the documentation anymore. He had a receipt, he said, at one time.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, for the rental.
That would put some flesh on the bones, wouldn't it?
Would that blow up the internet, probably. Well, you never know what's going to blow the internet up. And that's the thing with your channel, man. You with the way that you presented it, the way you came across, the way that you attack that thing with all that knowledge that you put together. Even the phase relationship between the mics, that was a great point to make. How you're trying to get those mics to hit at the same time. That's something that people don't realize. And that's obviously a way to make it sound as big as you can make it sound. And,
right.
Going through those graphs, doing the things that you did there, that really helped. And I think.
Oh, thank you, Jeff.
Yeah. I think that there's a lot of things in your videos. I went back through them again, and there's so many things to outboard processing. You covered that whole piece, which obviously you're a pro at, and it's a big piece of that puzzle, that the compressors and the channel and whatever they might have gone through, like an API or whatever they might have gone through on the front end. Because I know that Ed, in his studio, if you look through some of the photos, he had a whole rack of API pre's.
Yeah. The API pre's, 1176s, LA2As, all the gear that Sunset would have had that he enjoyed, I guess. The only thing he didn't have was the Sunset reverb rooms, which is what makes the first 6 albums, first 5 albums sound so good, isn't it? I've recorded in Sunset, and those rooms do sound amazing. They're incredible echo chambers.
Yeah. How are the rooms though? As far like Studio 1, 2, what are they? Fairly live?
Yeah. Pretty live actually. Yeah. We were in there, and I was just recording with the drummer and a bass player. The drummer was from Wendy and Lisa band, Carla Razar. The keyboard player was from Michael Jackson's band, John Barnes, I think. Great bunch of people, but it was a long time ago, and I can't quite recall it all. It was kind of a bit of a blur because I was probably nervous as hell. And the woman recording it was Susan Rogers, who recorded all the Prince and the Revolution albums. Right. So I'm just amongst royalty, just this kid from the UK. So I was probably too nervous to remember too much. But what I do remember about Sunset was the fact that it felt like an old wooden cabin. It was very sort of vintage. It felt very sort of familiar and warm. Everyone in there was super cool. This would have been about 92, I guess. Maybe a bit earlier. Yeah, turn of the 80s into the 90s. But yeah, it was a fantastic place. Loved it. Wish I could go back now, actually.
Yeah, I want to eventually get in there on a tour, or maybe do one of those clinics they do with like Warren Hewitt or whoever. He does those things. And one of my buddies he went to Sunset and did that. And that'd be great. Just
right.
Those guys and learn some more studio stuff from them and work on all that. That's another thing, for you and me. It's transferred Eddie's whole, sound sculpting thing is turned into part of our everyday deal where we record and do all the
get
things.
Closer and further away.
Right, but but there is so many, like this as an engineer, that this goes back to this discussion about the post or pre and post processing of Eddie's sound.
Yeah.
The elements of every mix, from the drums, cymbals, everything in it. This is something Don was always a master at. Makes the total. Yeah. And a lot of people talk about how Mutt Lange, when you would separate something from his mix, it would be this horrible sound. But
right.
In the mix, it was perfect.
But you see, I think Don was the opposite of that. I think Don would have been like, every element has got to sound beautiful. Because, Little Feat, man.
Yeah, right.
Right. Those Little Feat albums he did, Jesus, the best sounds ever. So I think Don was probably purist.
Yeah, very organic.
Very organic.
totally different world from Mutt Lang as far as production techniques.
And I think Don learned a lot from that. Like he would use 2 compressors for Lowell George's slide playing. He'd use 2 1176s in a chain. And I think that's what's going on with the clean sound on Hear About It Later, the Van Halen one with the chorus and the clean sound. I think that's, again, it's like double compressed, I think. So yeah, Don obviously picked up a few sort of next level engineer things that an engineer wouldn't normally do first and foremost, but he was willing to go that extra distance, which is why I think there were possibly things like the slaving. I also think the Pultec probably had a lot to do with Eddie's sound, because if you've ever messed with a Pultec, you can attenuate the bass whilst you are boosting the bass. And the frequency that gets attenuated is just a little bit higher up than the frequency you're boosting. And if you've ever listened to Ed and wondered like why the mid-range is a little bit unusual, like the bottom half of the mid-range seems to be less than normal. And he always said he didn't like mid-range, didn't he? Right. But then he had a lot of mid-range in his sound, so I couldn't quite work out what he meant. But I think it was that 300-ish area that he managed to that Don used to attenuate with the Pultec. And it just tightened it up a little bit, just made it sound a little bit tiny bit scoopy and new. And the same with the top end. You can take away everything above 10K, but then you can boost 10K. And then you get that weird thing that you hear in Ed's sound where it's got like a presence and a brilliance to it, but it's not harsh. It's like a conundrum, isn't it? But that's what the Pultec does. So I think, I've not talked about this in my videos too much yet, but I think the Pultec's got a big part to play in it.
I think you're right. The EQing of, reproducing these sounds like in the Fractal, which I've been on this quest for 2 years with the Fractal, because it was a new product for me to go down the rabbit hole with, and it's quite the product.
Wow.
And deep. And so you can do all this multi-parametric EQing and whatever you want. Just about anything you can think of. Of course, that goes the whole, now you're in there for a year. You're out there for a year in the rabbit hole, and it's really
goodbye to your social life, Jeff. You've got a Fractal now, mate. Yeah.
When I think Fractal, I think, oh my God, here goes 6 hours today, gone. And but it is an amazing piece of gear. But like all the power that you're talking about that we would be able to do with that kind of EQ, you could pull off these days in some sort of Fractal.
You could. Wouldn't sound the same, but it would probably sound different and good. Sure,
because there's no analog, any of that analog feel or sound out of it, and that's a big part of the Pultec. A big part of the all those vintage pieces of gear. Your Trident, the what that imparts, and the APIs, and
big transformers, and they all have a sound modification set, effect.
Yeah, it's the thing that I think that we hear in vinyl that we don't. People say, "Oh, vinyl's crap." Yeah. Well, I don't know about you, but I hear something in vinyl that I don't hear anywhere else.
Yeah, it's alive. I think one of the theories is that in digital, once it's gone to digital, you've got separate photographs like a cartoon, and they're happening in sequence. They're the different samples, whether it's 41.1, 44.1 or 48K or whatever. And your brain has to then glue them back together. It's hearing separate moments, and your brain has to actually work hard to process that as a continuous sound. So the theory is that that's why it's a little bit less easy to listen to. It's a bit more taxing because your brain is having to work on it, whereas analog is a complete seamless flow of sound waves, which are, continuous wave. And I like that theory. I think that works.
Yeah, when I went and started rebuying vinyl that wasn't vinyl, stuff that I've used to being digital the entire time, right? Since the moment.
Yeah.
Now I'm buying it on vinyl, and I'm putting the vinyl on. I'm going, damn, this sounds better on vinyl. That record,
absolutely,
for
absolutely
decades, in this other format. And I was shocked.
Well, I do a test. Yeah, I do a test here where I've got music that I'll play on the computer. A session that I've recorded. And it'll come through the speakers, and I'll go out, and I can't hear it in the corridor because the room's soundproofed. But then I put some vinyl on, similar volume, because I can gauge where my dBs are. And I walked out, and the bass was following me down the corridor. So I thought, oh, it must just be that track that's got a lot of bass. So I put the digital version of that track on Spotify, walked out, couldn't hear the bass. So there's a frequency difference there, isn't there? I don't think analog has a bottom frequency range that has to stop at. I know they like to tuck away the bottom end, but it's still there. And it's like the top end on digital has to end at a certain place as well. Whereas in analog, it just goes on infinitely and just rolls off at a place. And that makes a huge difference because, you know, if a drummer's hitting cymbals, those cymbals they go into ultrasonics, and the sound waves in the ultrasonics will then modulate against the guitar sounds in the mix. And the whole thing has an effect, even though it's outside of the hearing range, it's still got a sound wave that modulates against the lower sounds. And that's one of the reasons digital doesn't quite work, is if you have a low sample rate, then all those ultrasonics can't combine. So I always say for people recording loud guitar music or cymbal music, rock bands basically, get your sample rate up to like 192 or whatever it is. You know, go stupid high, and capture all that detail. And then at the end, you can fold it back down. But by that point, it's intermodulated and made the effect that it should have. So just a bit of a nerdy sample rate business there.
But that is interesting, you know, like you said, because it does go beyond, you know, there is more than just high frequency that we hear, you know, especially.
It's energy.
Right. It's air moving basically. So yeah, there is that effect that we, like you said, okay, the samples, even though we don't really perceive it with our ears, our brain perceives it.
Exactly. It has to reconstruct it into a complete flow, and it's not an easy thing to do.
And our brain's not, and our brain's telling us one thing, and the tech sheets are telling us another.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's the best sound ever.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah. When CDs came out, and they said they'd last forever. And my dad had a cafe at the time, and he'd have these CDs, and he'd say, "Martin, they don't play." And I'd have a look, and the label where it's got the writing on, he'd polished. And then I turned it over the play side, and it got cake and hair and glue. It's like they told us all sorts of things like they'd last forever, but you know, nothing lasts forever. Although vinyl records seem to last quite a while, don't they?
I'm back to collecting. You see it all behind me over there on this side. Well, that side. Over there, I've got a whole pile of stuff over there. A lot of new old stuff. You know, like the new Van Halen stuff that's coming out. You know, everything that from the
Me too.
Hagar era was not all that was very available on vinyl when it was originally.
Oh,
you know, like 90, 91, very low number, and as you got to 95, almost nothing was out there. You know, with balance.
Yeah, it was all CD then, wasn't it?
Right. So you know, I was on cassette by OU812.
Oh, okay. Did you ever go mini disc?
I didn't have that. No, but I do remember that. But I remember buying OU812 in Europe in '88. I was there on a trip.
Oh yeah.
And I bought that and Toto, one of the Toto albums, and open up and say Poison. I was in Europe in '88, and those are the three
fantastic
cassettes I bought in Europe, and I remember distinctly OU812 on cassette. So after that, you know, everything I was buying was on cassette for my car, you know, and then CD came around, and so I didn't own. Last vinyl I owned of Van Halen was, I think, the first Sammy Hagar 5150. You know, that was it, and then you know, 91.
I had the same. I had that one on vinyl too, but then recently I've just gone back and bought them all on vinyl. And it does sound better. It sounds more like it leaps off the record. It just has more energy to it. Yeah, don't know why.
Space and
more warm.
Yeah, more warm. Space. I mean, because I put it on, you know, right on my studio monitors in here, and that's why I just have as good an experience as I could. So I'm, you know, doing that like you are, side by side with my Pro Tools. And so I'm able to hear everything in pretty super high definition, you know, even from whatever other sources I might bring it in from. But You can clearly hear between the sources.
Yeah. It might not be the best deck in the world, or it might be the best deck in the world, but just the deck itself sounds like a different phenomenon, doesn't it? And it's the same thing with the slaving as well. It just sounds like a different beast. It's not subtle. It's really obvious that there's a difference in format. So I think in a lot of those cases, we can overthink it and we can read tech specs and it says, oh, it produces the same frequency range. And you go, okay, fine. But you listen to it and it's like night and day, the difference with some of these pieces of gear. Not subtle.
When I first went digital on my live board, I was using an Allen and Heath Mix Wizard, which was a pretty nice little analog console back then for bands. Yeah. And then I went to the PreSonus digital board. And I was like, it sounds cold and just something. Yeah. So I went out there in the garage with my whole PA, and I had both boards, and I was A-B'ing them, and I brought my wife out there. Of course, she's not techie. And I was like, you tell me which one you like better. She picked Allen and Heath.
She did which?
She picked the analog board. She was like,
of course.
Yeah, sounds different. Sounds warmer, better.
Of course. Yeah, the truth doesn't lie, right?
I mean, it was weird, but I mean, that was, of course, first generation digital live console for consumer, like average consumer. And and I remember like when the 03R and the 01V and all those first came out, it was digital, and I don't know if they sound any better. But they were first generation, the first converters. And
yeah, I had an 02R when it came out, the Yamaha desk, very popular. And I don't think very popular, and I've got no recordings from that period that I listened to and think that was good. I've just thrown them all away. It was terrible. I mean, I'm not saying it was an awful sound, but it didn't inspire me to do anything that lasted, But I heard from the BBC engineers that used to have all the valve equipment, and then they switched to solid state desks. And apparently the day they did the swap over, the engineers cried because they said, how are we going to make this sound good? The valves just did it for them. They literally plugged the signal in, turned it up, and it sounded like music. And then they swapped it to transistor, and it's like, oh, that's harder now. Okay, we're going to have to do a few tweaks here and use nicer mics. And then it goes to digital, and it's a little bit harder again. It's even more unforgiving. And I don't know why we're moving away from the good stuff towards the easy stuff. Maybe, well, I do. It's the same thing that's happened in musical instruments, isn't it? I think 82 to 84 was probably the peak of technology, where the bean counters weren't trying to make it cheaper to build. And then suddenly they just went, oh, no, we're going to make this really cheap now. And so there's very little equipment that I like or buy that's made after 82, for instance, unless it's a pickup that some guys built or the Bray amp, Other than that, my console's from 79. I've got a Telefunken tape machine here from the 70s, tape echo from late 70s, Yeah, old gear. Love it.
Right. Well, like you said, in your video, though, you were making the point about, EQ and what that does to the final product. You want to use as little as possible. I mean, that's the general thing, right? With Landy, like you made this kind of assertion in your video that the less you can do in post, the better. And the better you get it down that phase, the phase right, the better it's going to sound.
Yeah. Well, I think by this point, Don had done the process so many times that he knew what mastering would do to the sound. He knew what the tape was going to do to the sound. And so he'd go through his process knowing what the end result was going to sound like. Whereas a lot of newer engineers and producers would be desperately trying to make it perfect at every stage, and maybe overcooking it. That's the most common thing you do as a younger engineer, is you work too hard at it and you try to make something explosive happen on the first point of contact with the music. But if you know about mastering and engineering and mixing, then it will blow up in its presentation through all of those different compression stages. And the worst thing you can do is to maximize it too early. And I'm sure Don, by the point of working with Ed, had been through the process just enough times to know what it would end up at if he did the right things. And the tape machine is going to give you an EQ sound. So you don't need to add certain things if you know the tape machine's going to do it for you.
Sure. It's having that whole process in your mind and knowing, the end result, where it's going to be roughly. It's kind of like with live sound. Like, I'm constantly like working with the, not only the gain levels, but I'm having to, because a lot of times I end up running my own sound, so I have to read my musicians and singers and know where they're going to be without knowing where they're going to be.
That's hard.
They're not going to do it in sound check.
No.
Right? They're going to do it live. And then I've got.
Did you get that? Did you get that thing with the keyboard player where they sound check at 5 on their slider? And then as soon as the gig happens, they're like pushing it to 10, and they've got a lot more in the tank at 10, haven't they? It does my head in.
It's brutal. Yeah, exactly. So it's a moving target, but if you have done it enough, like you're saying with Landy, you know where that target's going to land.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's really just experience, and he had the Doobie Brothers and all that, all the Little Feat and all those other things that he had been involved in. So he had a lot of experience, and I hate it that he is not celebrated more, and that we don't know more about his history other than what Greg's been able to bring out in Ted Templeton's book, because he has a storied history. That is,
absolutely. Well, they talk about him a lot on the Sunset interviews, don't they?
They try to bring as much as they can.
And they talk about him in revered terms as well, like the guy who's the son of the original owner. He says that Don would be one of those guys that they'd talk to if they wanted to talk about new equipment or changing the studio. He was one of those super engineers that they'd go to first and get his opinion on it. So he was revered as one of the heavy hitters for sure, out of all those guys.
I think Eddie said that he used to be in the telephone business or something, and he rewired that old board of his, the one that he bought what was it? I forget when it was. He got a used console. It was a dang, I'm losing my mind right now.
Oh, the one in 5150.
Yeah. It was
was it DeMeo?
No, not Bill.
DeMedio was the console builder for
that was it.
Sunset.
Yeah,
API DeMedio.
He had something else there, but it was a console that Don found in another studio, and they ripped it out, and it was crap. I think Jay was like, "We're going to use this," and so Don rebuilt the whole thing for him, and I believe that was what Jump was cut on in all of '84. So.
Wow. It sounded great. It was different, but it sounded great.
Yeah, I mean, that was that whole thing where they started mixing the electronic kit in, and there was a weird thing back then, like people were doing hybrid. With Simmons and whatever, trying to, of course, eliminate gating and all the other things that you can do by doing that. But
it gave us Hot for T-shirt.
It's true. Yeah. It gave us an amazing song and weird because, those were the Flock of Seagulls territory or whoever else was using Simmons at the time. But when Van Halen did it was different.
Yeah, totally. They could always Van Halenize anything, couldn't they?
That's amazing, man. Well, I wanted to thank you for coming on. Spend a couple hours with me, 2.5 hours.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. I've absolutely enjoyed it. I've got one Van Halen friend in my local town, and once he's got bored with me, then I can't talk Van Halen to anybody. So this has been a real blast. Thank you very much for having me.
There's a million of us out there, and it's cool to have somebody from across the pond on. And you'll be my first one. My other buddy is Jay Palmer, who has a YouTube called Jay Palmer Guitar, and Jay.
All right.
Jay is from Brighton. I was trying to think.
Okay.
Earlier. And Jay,
down south.
Yeah, Jay was his kind of first big videos he did were the Lynch licks. He would do like breakdowns of George Lynch songs.
I've watched them then. Yeah, I'm always trying to learn George. It's too hard for me.
Right. It's really different. Right. It's like Eddie.
It's crazy.
It's so. One thing I'll say about his playing is, as I had to learn it to do multiple tribute shows over the last few years since his passing, it is so much harder than what you think it is. Like get it under your fingers to get the feel.
Yeah.
It's like one of my guys said it. He was inspired by Eddie when he was a kid, and he was like, "There's a lifetime of learning just what he did alone."
It's so true. You can't get near it until you've got to an exceptional level of playing ability. Until those fingers are so strong, you can do a hammer onto nothing and all of that kind of business. Or you can just do legatos for 30 seconds and not stop. Until you get there, it's just not happening at all, isn't it? And then eventually your technique just allows you to dip into it and you can start learning some of the licks. And then it becomes really exciting because then you're off and running. And then finally you'll be doing the ice cream man, the big stretch thing,
I have a friend in Oklahoma who does that behind his head.
Oh, that's just showing off. That's unfair.
His name's Joshua.
I can only do it here. I can do it beside my face.
Joshua
but
Jones.
Not down here.
Joshua Jones is this kid from Tulsa, Oklahoma, that I ran across at a friend of Greg's, because Greg's out there too. And he's this little phenom, and I went to see him do a tribute show, and he did that behind his head. I was like, you're killing me.
Damn. Stop.
You're killing me with that.
Yeah. That's just unfair. That's not fair.
But anyway, anytime you want to hook up, you let me know. Maybe in the future I'll have you on a round table or something with a bunch of tone geeks.
That would be amazing. I'd love that. It sounds the right company for me. So yeah, cheers, man. Thanks so much for chatting, Jeff.
Thank you so much, brother. And you let me know if you need anything, and I'll get this put together and get it out there. And we'll talk, I'm sure, in between anytime.
Anytime, Jeff. It's been an absolute pleasure. Cheers, man.
Thank you, Martin. Have a good one, buddy.
Cheers. And you too. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.